Welcome, sleepy listeners, to another soothing journey through the annals of history. Tonight, we'll be exploring some of the less glamorous aspects of the Wild West, ancient Rome, and other fascinating periods that might just lull you into a peaceful slumber. Our first tale will transport you to the dusty streets and lawless frontier of the American West. You might think you'd be a quick-draw cowboy or a fearless settler, but the reality was far less romantic. We'll uncover why you probably wouldn't last a day in those harsh conditions. Then we'll travel back in time to the Grand Empire of Rome, where we'll discover some surprisingly mundane details about daily life that might make you grateful for modern conveniences. So settle in, close your eyes, and let the gentle waves of history wash over you. Remember, the more bored you feel, the better you'll sleep. Sweet dreams, history buffs. As we journey through the dusty trails of the Wild West, I invite you to join me in a small act of engagement. If you find yourself drifting off to sleep during our historical lullaby, please consider leaving a gentle thumbs up before you close your eyes. It's a simple gesture that helps our channel grow and allows us to continue bringing you these soothing tales of the past. And for those of you still awake, why not subscribe to our channel? It's like staking your claim on a piece of digital frontier land, ensuring you never miss our next historical adventure. Remember, in the Old West, information traveled slowly, but here, you'll always be the first to know when a new video arrives. Now let's saddle up and mosey on down the trail of history. We've got a long journey ahead, filled with tales of cowboys, outlaws, and the harsh realities of frontier life. So settle in, pull up your imaginary blanket, and let the gentle rhythm of the past lull you into a peaceful slumber. As the first rays of sunlight peek through the dusty windows of your humble abode in the Wild West, you might find yourself yearning for the comforts of modern life. The year is 1875, and your day is about to begin in a way that would challenge even the hardiest of 21st century individuals. First, let's consider your sleeping arrangements. Unlike the plush memory foam mattresses we're accustomed to today, you'd be lucky to have a simple straw-filled mattress. More likely, you'd be sleeping on a thin, lumpy pallet stuffed with corn husks or whatever materials you could scrounge up. Your pillow, a sack filled with feathers if you're fortunate, or perhaps just your rolled-up coat. As you stretch and yawn, the chill of the morning air bites at your skin. Central heating is a luxury of the future, so your room temperature fluctuates with the whims of nature. In the winter, you'd wake up to a frigid room, your breath visible in the cold air. In the summer, the stifling heat would already be building, promising a day of discomfort ahead. Now it's time to get dressed. Forget about stepping into a warm shower to wake yourself up. Bathing is a weekly affair at best, usually reserved for Saturday nights to be presentable for church on Sunday. Instead, you'd splash some water on your face from a basin if you remembered to fill it the night before. Otherwise, you might need to fetch water from a well or nearby stream. Your clothing options are limited and practical. For men, it's likely a pair of sturdy work pants, a cotton shirt, and boots. Women would don a long skirt, a blouse, and a corset, yes, even for daily chores. The concept of comfortable clothing as we know it today simply doesn't exist. Everything is designed for durability and function, not comfort. As your stomach growls, thoughts turn to breakfast. Don't expect to saunter into the kitchen and pop some bread in the toaster or grab a quick bowl of cereal. Your first task of the day might be to rekindle the fire in the wood-burning stove. This process alone could take 15 to 20 minutes, assuming you have dry kindling and your matches haven't gotten damp. Once the fire's going, you'd put on a pot of coffee, if you're lucky enough to have some. Coffee was a valuable commodity in the Wild West, and many people made do with chicory or other coffee substitutes. Your breakfast would likely consist of whatever was left over from the previous night's dinner, perhaps some cold biscuits or cornbread, maybe some salt pork if you had it. Fresh fruit or vegetables, unless you grew them yourself or lived near a town with regular supply wagons, these would be rare luxuries. Most of your diet would consist of preserved foods, salted meats, dried beans, and hearty vegetables that could last without refrigeration. Speaking of refrigeration, that's another modern convenience you'd sorely miss. In the Wild West, keeping food fresh was a constant challenge. You might have a root cellar for storing some items, but generally, you'd need to eat what you had before it spoiled. This meant a lot of repetition in meals and very little variety in your diet. After breakfast, it's time to start your day's work. But first, nature calls. You head outside to the outhouse, a small wooden structure set a short distance from your main dwelling. Indoor plumbing is still decades away from most frontier homes. The outhouse is cold in the winter, swarming with flies in the summer, and always carries an unpleasant odor. Toilet paper, a luxury not yet widely available. You'd likely use corn cobs, leaves, or old newspaper if you had any. Now let's consider your occupation. Unless you're one of the few professionals like a doctor or lawyer, your work is likely to be physically demanding. If you're a farmer, your day starts at dawn and doesn't end until dusk. You'd be plowing fields, planting, or harvesting crops, all by hand or with the help of horses or oxen. The work is backbreaking and relentless. If you're a miner, you face different but equally challenging conditions. You descend into dark, dusty tunnels, spending hours swinging a pickaxe or operating dangerous equipment. The constant threat of cave-ins, toxic gases, and explosions would hang over you every day. For those in towns, you might work as a shopkeeper, blacksmith, or in one of the many saloons that dotted the western landscape. While perhaps not as physically demanding as farming or mining, these jobs came with their own set of challenges. Long hours, difficult customers, and the ever-present threat of robbery or violence were part of daily life. Women's work, often overlooked in romanticized tales of the Wild West, was equally demanding. Running a household without modern conveniences was a full-time job. Cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, caring for children and livestock, all these tasks required significant time and effort. Many women also contributed to family businesses or took in laundry or sewing to help make ends meet. As you go about your day, you'd be constantly aware of the dangers around you. The Wild West wasn't called wild for nothing. Depending on your location, you might need to be on guard against Native American raids, outlaw gangs, or dangerous wildlife. Even if you lived in a relatively peaceful area, accidents were common and often deadly. A fall from a horse, a farming accident, or a simple cut that becomes infected could spell your doom in an era before antibiotics and modern medical care. The isolation of frontier life would also weigh heavily on you. News from the outside world would be scarce and often outdated by the time it reached you. Letters from family back east might take weeks or months to arrive. The sense of loneliness and disconnection from the wider world was a constant companion for many settlers. As we reflect on these challenges, it becomes clear why you wouldn't last a day in the Wild West. The physical hardships, constant dangers, and lack of modern comforts would be a shock to our system. Yet, it's important to remember that the people who lived during this time were remarkably resilient. They faced these challenges daily and built the foundation for the society we enjoy today. Their strength and perseverance in the face of adversity is a testament to the human spirit. While we may not wish to trade our comfortable lives for theirs, we can certainly admire their courage and determination. The next time you enjoy a hot shower, a varied meal, or the safety of your home, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come since the days of the Wild West. As we journey deeper into the untamed wilderness of the Wild West, let's explore a topic that might make your skin crawl: the hygiene horrors that pioneers faced on a daily basis. Prepare yourself for a less than pleasant trip through the gritty reality of cleanliness, or rather the lack thereof, in the American frontier. In the 1800s, the concept of personal hygiene was vastly different from what we know today. Settlers in the Wild West faced numerous challenges when it came to staying clean, and their practices would likely shock our modern sensibilities. Let's start with the basics: bathing. Imagine going weeks or even months without a proper bath. For many pioneers, this was their reality. Water was a precious resource, often needed for drinking and cooking rather than washing. When baths did occur, they were typically infrequent events, sometimes happening as rarely as once a month or even less. The process of bathing itself was a far cry from our modern showers or luxurious bubble baths. Picture this: a single large tub of water heated over a fire, shared by an entire family. The order of bathing usually went from the father to the mother, then the children from oldest to youngest, and finally the baby. By the end, the water was so dirty that the saying, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," became a common phrase, warning against discarding something valuable along with something undesirable. But what about everyday cleanliness? Well, most people simply didn't have the luxury of daily hygiene routines. Instead, they might engage in what was called a sponge bath or washing up, which involved using a small amount of water to clean the face, hands, and perhaps other essential areas. This was often done using a shared basin and cloth, which, as you can imagine, wasn't the most hygienic method by today's standards. Now let's talk about dental hygiene, or the lack thereof. Toothbrushes, as we know them, didn't become common until the late 19th century. Before that, people in the Wild West might use twigs with frayed ends as makeshift toothbrushes. Some would rub their teeth with salt or baking soda, while others used crushed eggshells or chalk. Toothpaste, that was a luxury few could afford, and when available, it often contained ingredients we'd consider questionable today, such as soap or chalk. The result of these rudimentary dental practices was predictably unpleasant. Bad breath was commonplace, and tooth decay was rampant. Many adults lost most or all of their teeth at a relatively young age, leading to difficulties in eating and speaking. Dentures, when available, were expensive and often ill-fitting, made from materials like wood, ivory, or even human teeth taken from corpses, a thought that might make you grateful for modern dentistry. Let's not forget about the challenges of managing bodily waste. Outhouses were the norm in the Wild West, and they were far from the sanitary porta-potties we might encounter today. These small structures, often placed some distance from the main living area, were simple holes in the ground covered by a wooden seat. They attracted flies, emitted foul odors, and were breeding grounds for bacteria and disease. In the absence of toilet paper, which wasn't widely available until the late 19th century, people had to get creative. Common substitutes included corn cobs, leaves, grass, or pages torn from old catalogs or newspapers. The wealthy might use scraps of cloth, while others simply used their hands and washed them afterward, a practice that contributed to the spread of diseases. Speaking of disease, the lack of proper sanitation and hygiene in the Wild West led to frequent outbreaks. Cholera, typhoid fever, and dysentery were common ailments, often spread through contaminated water sources. The germ theory of disease wasn't widely accepted until the late 19th century. So many people were unaware of the connection between cleanliness and health. Let's turn our attention to laundry, a task that was far more labor-intensive than tossing clothes into a washing machine. Washing clothes was typically a full-day affair, often done weekly or even less frequently. The process involved hauling water, heating it over a fire, and scrubbing clothes on a washboard with harsh lye soap. Drying clothes outdoors left them susceptible to dust and insects, while drying them indoors could lead to musty odors. The concept of deodorant was virtually non-existent in the Wild West. Body odor was simply a fact of life, masked by strong perfumes or colognes for those who could afford them. Many people believed that strong body odor was a sign of health and vitality, a stark contrast to our modern obsession with smelling fresh and clean. Now let's discuss the state of women's hygiene during menstruation. Modern conveniences like disposable pads or tampons were unheard of. Women typically used reusable cloth rags, which had to be washed and dried between uses. This process was not only inconvenient, but also potentially unhygienic, especially given the limited access to clean water and proper sanitation. The management of head lice was another constant battle in the Wild West. These tiny parasites thrived in the close living conditions and infrequent hair washing that was common at the time. Families would often share combs to remove lice, inadvertently spreading the infestation. Various cures were attempted, including applying kerosene to the scalp, a dangerous practice that could lead to severe burns or even death. As we near the end of our exploration into the hygiene horrors of the Wild West, it's worth noting that not everyone lived in such dire conditions. Wealthy individuals in established towns might have access to better hygiene products and practices. However, for the average settler or pioneer, maintaining cleanliness was a constant struggle against the harsh realities of frontier life. In conclusion, the next time you step into a hot shower, brush your teeth with minty toothpaste, or simply flush a toilet, take a moment to appreciate these modern conveniences. The hygiene practices of the Wild West serve as a stark reminder of how far we've come in terms of personal cleanliness and public health. While we might romanticize certain aspects of frontier life, the reality of day-to-day existence was often far from glamorous and decidedly less than fresh. As we continue our journey through the Wild West, let's explore one of the most perilous activities you'd face if you were transported back to this era: eating breakfast. Yes, you heard that right. Even the simple act of starting your day could be fraught with danger in the untamed frontier. Imagine waking up in a small, drafty cabin or a canvas tent on the open plains. The first thing you need to do is start a fire to cook your morning meal. But this isn't as simple as turning on your electric stove. You'd have to gather kindling and wood, hoping it's dry enough to catch. If it rained recently, you might be out of luck. Once you've got your fire going, you'd reach for your cast iron skillet. These heavy pans were essential tools in the Wild West, but they required careful maintenance. If you didn't season it properly or clean it correctly, your food could stick or even rust, potentially leading to dangerous bacteria growth. Now let's talk about the food itself. Forget about reaching for a box of cereal or popping bread in the toaster. Your typical Wild West breakfast would likely consist of bacon, beans, and biscuits. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, not quite. First, there's the bacon. In the 1800s, preserving meat was a constant challenge. Without refrigeration, bacon was often cured with large amounts of salt to prevent spoilage. While this helped keep the meat edible for longer, it also meant that your breakfast could be dangerously high in sodium, potentially leading to severe dehydration in the arid western climate. Then we have the beans. These were a staple food due to their long shelf life and high protein content. However, improperly cooked beans could be more than just unappetizing, they could be deadly. Raw or undercooked beans contain a compound called phytohemagglutinin, which can cause severe food poisoning. Without modern medical care, such an illness could be life-threatening. As for the biscuits, they might seem harmless, but the flour used to make them could pose its own risks. Stored in barrels or sacks, flour was often contaminated with insects, rodent droppings, or even toxic ergot fungi. Ingesting these contaminants could lead to serious illnesses or even hallucinations. Water, an essential part of any meal, was another potential hazard. Rivers and streams were often polluted with animal carcasses, human waste, and mining runoff. Drinking untreated water could lead to cholera, dysentery, or typhoid fever, all potentially fatal in an era before antibiotics. Even the coffee, a staple for many cowboys and settlers, wasn't without its dangers. Coffee beans were often adulterated with other substances to stretch supplies. These additives could include everything from sawdust to ground acorns, some of which could be harmful if consumed regularly. Let's not forget about the cookware and utensils. The concept of germ theory was not widely accepted until the late 19th century, so hygiene practices were far from what we consider acceptable today. Dishes and utensils were often shared without proper cleaning, leading to the easy spread of diseases. If you managed to navigate all these potential pitfalls and actually eat your breakfast, you weren't out of the woods yet. The harsh lifestyle of the Wild West meant that you needed a lot of calories to sustain yourself through long days of physical labor. A meager or poorly balanced breakfast could leave you weak and unable to perform necessary tasks, which could be dangerous in itself. Now let's consider the social aspect of breakfast in the Wild West. If you were traveling with a group or staying in a town, meals were often communal affairs. This meant exposure to a wide variety of people, some of whom might be carrying contagious diseases. Tuberculosis, for example, was rampant during this period and could easily spread in close quarters over a shared meal. For those working on cattle drives, breakfast was often served from a chuck wagon. While this might sound quaint, it presented its own set of challenges. Food was prepared in large quantities and had to last for days or weeks. Without proper storage, bacteria could flourish, leading to widespread food poisoning among the crew. Even the act of eating itself could be dangerous in the Wild West. Imagine trying to enjoy your meal while constantly being on alert for potential threats. Native American raids, outlaw gangs, or wild animals could interrupt your breakfast at any moment. The stress of always being on guard could lead to digestive issues and other health problems over time. It's also worth noting that in many parts of the Wild West, fresh fruits and vegetables were scarce. This lack of vitamins and minerals in the diet could lead to deficiencies like scurvy, which was not uncommon among settlers and miners who subsisted mainly on preserved foods. So the next time you sit down to a leisurely breakfast in your comfortable, modern kitchen, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. The simple act of eating your morning meal in the Wild West was a daily adventure fraught with potential dangers. From foodborne illnesses to the constant threat of attack, breakfast time was just another reminder of the harsh realities of frontier life. As we move on from our exploration of the perils of breakfast in the Wild West, let's take a moment to reflect on how these daily challenges shaped the resilient spirit of the pioneers. Their ability to face each day, starting with a potentially hazardous breakfast, speaks volumes about their determination and grit. It's a testament to human adaptability and the will to survive in even the most unforgiving circumstances. As we continue our journey through the Wild West, let's explore how you might navigate the bustling towns of this era. Picture yourself stepping off a dusty stagecoach onto the main street of a frontier settlement. The sights, sounds, and smells would be overwhelming to your modern senses. First, you'd notice the unpaved roads. Unlike the smooth asphalt you're accustomed to, these streets were often nothing more than well-worn dirt paths. During dry spells, clouds of dust would billow up with every passing horse or wagon. In wet weather, the streets turned into treacherous mud pits that could swallow a horse's leg up to the knee. Navigation wasn't as simple as following street signs or using a smartphone app. Many frontier towns grew organically, with buildings erected wherever space allowed. Streets might curve unexpectedly or dead-end without warning. Some towns did have rudimentary grid systems, but even these could be confusing to newcomers. You'd likely orient yourself using prominent landmarks. The saloon, with its swinging doors and raucous sounds, was often at the heart of town life. The general store, adorned with barrels and crates on its porch, would be another key location. Churches, with their tall steeples, served as beacons visible from a distance. As you walked down the street, you'd need to be constantly alert. There were no sidewalks in most towns, so pedestrians, horses, and wagons all shared the same space. The concept of right-of-way was loosely defined at best. You'd have to dodge not only horse-drawn vehicles, but also free-roaming livestock that often wandered through town. The boardwalks in front of businesses offered some respite from the chaotic street, but even these could be hazardous. Uneven planks, protruding nails, and gaps between boards were common. In some towns, different sections of boardwalk might be at varying heights, requiring you to step up or down as you walked. Street lighting, if it existed at all, was minimal. Oil lamps or candles in shop windows provided some illumination, but once the sun set, the town would be plunged into near total darkness. Navigating at night without a lantern would be a perilous endeavor, with open cellars, hitching posts, and other obstacles waiting to trip the unwary. Public sanitation was another challenge you'd face. The concept of municipal garbage collection didn't exist. Refuse was often simply tossed into the street or piled in vacant lots. The stench could be overwhelming, especially in summer. Open sewers ran along some streets, adding to the olfactory assault and posing a constant health hazard. Water was a precious commodity in many frontier towns. Public wells or pumps might be scattered throughout the settlement, but the water quality was often questionable. Carrying water back to your lodgings would be a daily chore, and you'd quickly learn to conserve every drop. Speaking of lodgings, finding a place to stay could be an adventure in itself. Hotels in frontier towns ranged from relatively comfortable establishments to little more than glorified barns. Beds might be nothing more than straw-filled mattresses on rope supports, and privacy was often a luxury. Sharing a room, or even a bed with strangers, was not uncommon. If you were lucky enough to secure a private room, don't expect modern amenities. Chamber pots served as toilets, and baths were infrequent luxuries. Some hotels offered communal bathing facilities, but the water was rarely changed between users. The concept of daily showers would be completely foreign to most frontier town residents. As you explored the town, you'd encounter a diverse mix of people. Cowboys fresh off the trail, miners covered in dust, well-dressed gamblers, and hardworking families all rubbed shoulders in these frontier settlements. The social norms you're accustomed to might not apply here. Direct eye contact with strangers could be seen as a challenge, and the concept of personal space was quite different from modern standards. Communication would pose another challenge. While English was the predominant language, you'd hear a variety of dialects and accents. Spanish was common in many areas, especially in the Southwest. Native American languages might also be heard, particularly in trading posts or on the outskirts of town. The local economy would be largely cash-based, but not necessarily using currency as you know it. Gold dust, nuggets, or even barter might be accepted forms of payment. Paper money, if used, could vary widely in value depending on the issuing bank's reputation. You need to quickly learn the local economic norms to avoid being cheated. Law enforcement in these towns was often minimal. A single sheriff or marshal might be responsible for maintaining order, and their authority could be tenuous at best. You'd need to be prepared to defend yourself, as the concept of calling 911 for help simply didn't exist. As night falls on our imaginary frontier town, you might find yourself gravitating towards the saloon. These establishments were more than just drinking holes. They were the social hubs of many communities. Here, you could gather news, meet fellow travelers, and perhaps find work or lodging. However, entering a Wild West saloon would be a far cry from visiting a modern bar. The air would be thick with tobacco smoke, the floor sticky with spilled drinks and tobacco juice. The clientele could range from amiable to downright dangerous, and you'd need to be cautious about who you engaged with. As you retire for the night, perhaps in a rented room above the saloon, you'd reflect on the challenges of navigating this frontier town. The sights, sounds, and experiences of the day would be a stark reminder of how different life in the Wild West was from your modern existence. Every step, every interaction, required a level of awareness and adaptability that most of us today would find exhausting. And so, as we conclude our exploration of town navigation in the Wild West, remember that surviving in this era required far more than just physical endurance. It demanded a keen sense of observation, quick thinking, and the ability to adapt to an environment that was often unpredictable and fraught with hidden dangers. As we journey deeper into the untamed territories of the Wild West, we encounter a landscape where law and order were as elusive as water in the desert. The concept of justice in this era was often as rough and unpredictable as the terrain itself. In the absence of established legal systems, many communities took matters into their own hands. Vigilante justice was not uncommon, with groups of citizens forming impromptu posses to hunt down suspected criminals. These posses, while well-intentioned, often blurred the line between justice and vengeance. One of the most infamous examples of frontier justice was the practice of lynching. This brutal form of extrajudicial punishment saw suspected criminals hanged without trial, often based on little more than rumors or racial prejudice. The lack of due process meant that innocent people could easily fall victim to mob mentality. In some areas, the only semblance of law enforcement came in the form of bounty hunters. These individuals, motivated by financial reward rather than a sense of justice, would track down wanted criminals across vast stretches of wilderness. While some bounty hunters operated within the bounds of the law, others were little more than mercenaries, willing to bend or break rules to claim their prize. The role of the sheriff in Wild West towns was often a precarious one. Unlike modern law enforcement officers, sheriffs in the Old West were typically elected officials. This meant that their ability to enforce the law was sometimes compromised by political considerations or the need to maintain popularity among voters. Many sheriffs found themselves outgunned and outnumbered when facing organized gangs or powerful cattle barons. Some resorted to deputizing ordinary citizens during times of crisis, creating a makeshift police force that was often ill-equipped to handle serious criminal threats. The infamous OK Corral shootout in Tombstone, Arizona, serves as a prime example of the complex relationship between law enforcement and outlaws in the Wild West. The 1881 gunfight, which lasted a mere 30 seconds, pitted the Earp brothers and Doc Holliday against the Clanton-McLaury gang. This brief but deadly encounter has become synonymous with Wild West violence and the thin line between lawmen and criminals. As settlements grew and became more established, formal court systems began to take root. However, these early courts faced numerous challenges. Judges often had to travel vast distances on a circuit, holding court in different towns on a rotating basis. This meant that justice could be delayed for months or even years. The concept of plea bargaining, now a common practice in modern legal systems, had its origins in the Wild West. Overwhelmed courts and prosecutors would often negotiate with defendants to secure guilty pleas in exchange for reduced charges or sentences. This practice, while expedient, sometimes led to inconsistent application of justice. One of the most colorful aspects of Wild West law was the emergence of hanging judges. These were magistrates known for their harsh sentences and willingness to impose the death penalty. Judge Isaac Parker, nicknamed the Hanging Judge of Fort Smith, was particularly notorious. During his 21-year tenure, he sentenced 160 people to death, though only 79 of these sentences were actually carried out. The lack of formal prisons in many areas of the Wild West presented another challenge to law enforcement. Makeshift jails were often little more than reinforced shacks or the basement of a sheriff's office. These crude facilities were prone to jailbreaks, leading to dramatic pursuits across the frontier. As railroad expansion brought more people and commerce to the west, train robberies became a significant concern. The vast, open spaces between towns made trains vulnerable to attack by well-organized gangs. Law enforcement agencies and railroad companies often hired private security forces, such as the Pinkerton Detective Agency, to protect valuable cargo and apprehend train robbers. The Wild West also saw the rise of legendary outlaws who captured the public imagination. Figures like Jesse James, Billy the Kid, and Butch Cassidy became folk heroes to some, despite their criminal activities. Their ability to evade capture and their Robin Hood-like reputations often made them more popular than the lawmen pursuing them. One of the most effective tools in combating crime in the Wild West was the wanted poster. These simple sheets of paper, featuring a description of the suspect and the reward for their capture, were distributed widely. However, the reliability of these descriptions was often questionable, leading to cases of mistaken identity and false arrests. As the frontier pushed further west, conflicts between settlers and Native American tribes intensified. The U.S. government's response to these conflicts often blurred the lines between military action and law enforcement. The creation of Indian reservations and the enforcement of treaties added another layer of complexity to the already chaotic legal landscape of the Wild West. The discovery of gold and other precious minerals in various parts of the West led to the establishment of mining camps and buntos. These rapidly growing settlements often existed in a legal gray area, with makeshift systems of justice evolving to handle disputes over claims and the inevitable conflicts that arose in these high-stakes environments. As we drift towards sleep, imagine yourself in a dusty Wild West town, where the line between law and chaos is as thin as a whisper. The echoes of gunshots and the creaking of saloon doors blend with the distant howl of coyotes, creating a lullaby of the frontier. Let the weight of history settle over you like a warm blanket, carrying you gently into dreams of a time long past, where justice was as wild and unpredictable as the land itself. As we delve deeper into the harsh realities of the Wild West, let's explore one of the most terrifying aspects of frontier life: medical care, or rather, the lack thereof. The medical practices of the Old West were a far cry from the advanced healthcare we enjoy today. In fact, they were often more likely to kill you than cure you. Imagine you're a settler in a small frontier town. You wake up one morning with a throbbing toothache. In our modern world, you'd simply visit a dentist. But in the Wild West, your options were far more limited and far more dangerous. Dentistry in the 1800s was primitive at best. The local barber often doubled as the town's dentist, armed with little more than pliers and whiskey for anesthesia. If you were lucky, the tooth would be extracted quickly. If not, you might endure excruciating pain as the barber-dentist struggled to remove the offending molar. But dental issues were just the tip of the iceberg when it came to medical nightmares in the Wild West. Let's consider the plight of women during childbirth. Today, giving birth in a hospital with trained medical professionals is the norm. In the 1800s, however, childbirth was a perilous ordeal that often ended in tragedy. Midwives were the primary caregivers during childbirth, but their knowledge was often limited and based on folklore rather than medical science. Unsanitary conditions, lack of proper medical equipment, and ignorance about the causes of infections led to high mortality rates for both mothers and infants. One particularly gruesome practice was the use of birthing chairs. These were specially designed chairs with a hole in the seat, intended to make the birthing process easier. However, they often led to complications and increased the risk of infection. Speaking of infections, let's talk about the dreaded blood poisoning, or sepsis. In an era before antibiotics, even a small cut or scrape could lead to a life-threatening infection. The lack of understanding about germ theory meant that doctors and nurses often unknowingly spread infections from patient to patient. Imagine you're a cowboy who's been injured in a cattle drive. You arrive at the nearest town, hoping for medical attention. The local doctor examines your wound with unwashed hands, probes it with unsterilized instruments, and then stitches it up with a needle that's been used on countless other patients. Your chances of developing a deadly infection just skyrocketed. But what if you needed surgery? Well, you'd better hope you had a strong constitution and a high pain threshold. Anesthesia as we know it today didn't exist. The best you could hope for was a slug of whiskey or a bite on a leather strap to help you endure the pain. Surgeons of the Old West were often more butchers than healers. Many had little formal training, learning their trade through apprenticeships or simply by trial and error. Surgical procedures were performed without proper sanitation, and post-operative care was minimal. One of the most common surgeries in the Wild West was amputation. Whether due to gunshot wounds, accidents with farm equipment, or severe infections, the loss of limbs was a frequent occurrence. And remember, this was all done without proper anesthesia or sterile conditions. Let's not forget about the miracle cures and patent medicines that were prevalent in the Old West. Traveling salesmen, often called snake oil salesmen, would roll into town with wagons full of mysterious elixirs promising to cure everything from baldness to cancer. These medicines were often nothing more than a mixture of alcohol, opiates, and various herbs. At best, they did nothing to help the patient. At worst, they could cause addiction, poisoning, or even death. Yet, in the absence of real medical treatments, many desperate people turned to these dangerous concoctions. Mental health was another area where the Wild West fell woefully short. Conditions like depression, anxiety, or more severe mental illnesses were poorly understood and often treated with barbaric methods. Patients might be subjected to ice baths, isolation, or even primitive forms of electroshock therapy. The infamous insane asylums of the 19th century were places of horror rather than healing. Patients were often restrained, neglected, and subjected to experimental treatments that did more harm than good. Many people with treatable conditions were institutionalized for life, their suffering compounded by the very places meant to help them. Even something as simple as eyeglasses could be a luxury in the Wild West. If your vision started to fail, you might have to rely on poorly made spectacles ordered from a catalog, with no way to get a proper eye exam or fitting. This could lead to headaches, eye strain, and even accidents due to impaired vision. In the realm of preventative medicine, the Wild West was equally lacking. Vaccinations were in their infancy, and many deadly diseases ran rampant through communities. Outbreaks of smallpox, cholera, and typhoid fever could decimate entire towns. The lack of understanding about how diseases spread meant that quarantine measures were often ineffective or implemented too late. So the next time you find yourself complaining about a long wait at the doctor's office or the taste of cough syrup, remember the medical nightmares of the Wild West. Be grateful for the advancements in medical science that allow us to live longer, healthier lives. The frontier may have been a place of adventure and opportunity, but when it came to healthcare, it was truly the stuff of nightmares. As we conclude our journey through the Wild West, it's clear that surviving in this era was no easy feat. The romanticized image of cowboys and outlaws often overshadows the harsh realities that settlers faced daily. Let's recap some of the key reasons why you, a modern person, would struggle to last even a single day in this unforgiving environment. First and foremost, the lack of modern conveniences would be a significant shock to your system. Imagine waking up without electricity, running water, or indoor plumbing. Your morning routine would be drastically different, starting with the challenge of simply getting out of bed in a dimly lit, cold room. The absence of proper sanitation and hygiene practices would put you at constant risk of disease. Something as simple as a minor cut could lead to a life-threatening infection. The limited medical knowledge and primitive treatments of the time would offer little comfort if you fell ill or suffered an injury. Food safety would be another major concern. Without refrigeration or modern preservation techniques, your meals would often consist of salted or dried meats, hardtack, and whatever fresh produce you could grow or forage. The risk of food poisoning would be ever present, and a balanced diet would be a luxury rather than a norm. Transportation would pose significant challenges. Long-distance travel meant days or weeks on horseback or in a wagon, exposed to the elements and potential dangers along the way. The comfort of air-conditioned cars and smooth highways would be a distant dream. The constant threat of violence would keep you on edge. Disputes were often settled with firearms, and law enforcement was sparse and sometimes corrupt. Your survival skills would need to extend beyond just finding food and shelter. You'd need to be prepared to defend yourself at a moment's notice. The harsh climate of the American frontier would test your endurance. Extreme heat in the summers and bitter cold in the winters, with little respite from either, would make daily life a constant struggle. The lack of effective climate control in buildings would offer minimal relief from the elements. Your work life would be physically demanding and often dangerous. Whether you were a farmer, rancher, miner, or engaged in any other common profession of the time, long hours of back-breaking labor would be the norm. Workplace safety regulations were non-existent and injuries were common. The isolation and lack of communication with the outside world would likely take a toll on your mental health. News traveled slowly, and staying in touch with distant loved ones was difficult and infrequent. The sense of loneliness and disconnection could be overwhelming for someone accustomed to instant global communication. Education and entertainment, as we know them today, would be scarce. Books might be your primary source of information and amusement, assuming you had access to them and the ability to read. The vast wealth of knowledge and entertainment options we have at our fingertips would be unimaginable luxuries. In conclusion, while the Wild West holds a certain allure in our collective imagination, the reality of daily life in this era was far from glamorous. The combination of physical hardships, constant dangers, and lack of modern comforts would make survival a daily challenge for even the hardiest individuals from our time. As you drift off to sleep, consider how fortunate we are to live in an age where many of these hardships have been overcome. The conveniences and safety we often take for granted are the result of centuries of progress and innovation. While the Wild West may have its romantic appeal in stories and films, the comfort of your bed and the security of your home are reminders of how far we've come. As we journey back through time, let's explore the fascinating world of ancient Rome. This mighty civilization, which lasted for over 1,000 years, left an indelible mark on Western culture that still resonates today. From its humble beginnings as a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber River to its zenith as a vast empire spanning 3 continents, Rome's story is one of ambition, innovation, and endurance. Picture yourself walking through the bustling streets of Rome during its golden age. The air is filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and the sounds of merchants hawking their wares. Towering marble buildings and grand temples line the streets, their pristine white facades gleaming in the Mediterranean sun. In the distance, you can hear the roar of the crowd from the Colosseum, where gladiators battle for glory and survival. But Rome wasn't built in a day, as the saying goes. Its rise to power was a gradual process marked by. As we continue our journey through the annals of history, let's transport ourselves to the bustling streets of ancient Rome. Imagine waking up in a typical Roman domus, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. The day is about to begin, and with it, a series of morning rituals that might surprise you with their complexity, and at times, their surprising similarity to our modern routines. In ancient Rome, the day officially began at dawn. For the wealthy Roman citizen, this meant being awakened by their personal slave, who would enter the cubiculum or bedroom to rouse their master. The slave might gently call out, "Domine tempus est surger," Master, it is time to rise. As the Roman citizen stirred from sleep, they would first reach for their toga, the quintessential garment of Roman society. However, putting on a toga was no simple task. It required the assistance of at least one slave, and often more for the more elaborate styles favored by the upper classes. The process could take up to an hour, as the large piece of fabric was carefully draped and folded around the body. While the master of the house was being dressed, other slaves would be busy preparing the home for the day ahead. They would sweep the floors, tidy up the atrium, the central courtyard of the Roman home, and prepare the morning meal. Speaking of meals, breakfast in ancient Rome was a far cry from our modern, hearty affairs. The Romans typically ate a light morning meal called intaculum. This might consist of bread dipped in wine, perhaps some cheese, fruits, or leftovers from the previous night's dinner. The concept of a large breakfast was foreign to the Romans, who generally saved their appetite for later in the day. After this simple repast, a wealthy Roman citizen would begin their morning hygiene routine. They would wash their face and hands using water from a basin, which a slave would pour over their hands. Teeth cleaning was also an important part of the morning ritual. The Romans used a variety of methods to maintain oral hygiene, including chewing on twigs with frayed ends to act as a brush, and using abrasive powders made from ground-up bones or oyster shells mixed with honey as a sort of toothpaste. For those who could afford it, a visit to the public baths was a crucial part of the morning routine. The baths were not just places for cleansing, but also important social hubs where business was conducted, gossip was exchanged, and friendships were forged. The bathing process itself was elaborate, involving progression through rooms of different temperatures, from the tepidarium warm room to the caldarium hot room, and finally the frigidarium cold room. At the baths, Romans would be scraped clean with a strigil, a curved metal tool used to remove dirt, oil, and dead skin. They would then be anointed with perfumed oils, a luxury that was particularly prized in Roman society. The scents used were often quite strong by modern standards, a necessity in a world without deodorant or daily showers. For Roman women, the morning routine often included an extensive beauty regimen. They would apply face creams made from a variety of ingredients, some of which might seem quite strange to us today. These could include crocodile dung, ground snails, or swan fat. Hair was also a major focus, with elaborate styles requiring the assistance of skilled slaves. Wigs made from the hair of German captives were particularly prized for their blonde color. As the morning progressed, a Roman citizen would begin to prepare for the day's business. For many, this meant heading to the Forum, the center of Roman civic life. Here, they would attend to legal matters, participate in religious ceremonies, or engage in political discussions. The Forum was a bustling place, filled with the shouts of merchants, the arguments of lawyers, and the speeches of politicians. Before leaving the house, a Roman man would ensure he had his writing tablets with him. These wax-covered wooden boards were used for taking notes, writing letters, or keeping accounts. A metal stylus was used to scratch words into the wax, which could be smoothed over and reused when no longer needed. For those with religious duties, the morning might include offering sacrifices to the household gods, known as Lares and Penates. These deities were believed to protect the home and family, and small shrines to them were common features in Roman houses. Offerings might include food, wine, or small trinkets. As they stepped out into the streets of Rome, our citizen would be greeted by a cacophony of sounds and smells. The city was already alive with activity, shopkeepers opening their stalls, children running errands, and carts rumbling over the cobblestones. The smell of fresh bread from the bakeries would mingle with less pleasant odors from the city's open sewers. Traffic in ancient Rome could be just as frustrating as in modern cities. Julius Caesar himself had to implement traffic laws to deal with the congestion, banning most wheeled vehicles from the city during daylight hours. This meant that much of the city's goods had to be transported at night, adding to the noise and bustle of the Roman night. As our Roman citizen navigated the busy streets, they might stop at a thermopolium, a kind of ancient fast food restaurant. These establishments served hot food and drinks to busy Romans who didn't have time for a proper meal at home. The food was kept warm in large clay pots embedded in the counter. And so, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, the morning rituals of ancient Rome would give way to the bustle of daily life. From the elaborate process of dressing in a toga to the social interactions at the public baths, from the simple breakfast to the complex beauty routines, the mornings of ancient Romans were filled with activities both familiar and foreign to our modern sensibilities. As we drift off to sleep, let's ponder the similarities and differences between their world and ours. Perhaps in our dreams, we'll walk the streets of ancient Rome, feeling the warmth of the Italian sun on our faces and hearing the echoes of a civilization that still influences our world today. Welcome back to our journey through the less glamorous aspects of history. As we settle into the bustling streets of ancient Rome, you might find yourself longing for the relative safety of your modern bedroom. Let's explore why living in the heart of this legendary empire wasn't always as glorious as Hollywood might have you believe. First, let's talk about the constant threat of fire. Ancient Rome was a tinderbox waiting to ignite. The city was densely packed with wooden structures, and open flames were used for cooking and lighting. It's no wonder that fires were a frequent occurrence. The most infamous conflagration was the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, during Emperor Nero's reign. It burned for 6 days and 7 nights, destroying 3 of Rome's 14 districts and severely damaging 7 others. Imagine trying to sleep peacefully knowing that at any moment your entire neighborhood could go up in flames. But fire wasn't the only danger lurking in the shadows of Rome's narrow streets. The city's sewage system, while advanced for its time, was far from perfect. The main sewer, known as the Cloaca Maxima, often overflowed during heavy rains, flooding the streets with a foul mixture of waste and rainwater. Picture yourself trudging through ankle-deep sewage on your way to the Forum, the stench clinging to your clothes and skin. It's no wonder that diseases like dysentery and typhoid fever were common afflictions in ancient Rome. Speaking of health hazards, let's not forget about lead poisoning. The Romans used lead extensively in their plumbing systems, cookware, and even as a sweetener for wine. While they didn't understand the long-term effects of lead exposure, we now know it can cause a range of health problems, from cognitive issues to organ failure. Imagine sipping your favorite wine, unaware that each mouthful was slowly poisoning you. It's a sobering thought that might make you appreciate your modern, lead-free drinking water a bit more. Now let's turn our attention to the streets themselves. Unlike the smooth, paved roads we're accustomed to today, Roman streets were often uneven, poorly lit, and treacherous, especially at night. Potholes, loose stones, and accumulated garbage made walking a hazardous activity. To make matters worse, there was no organized system for garbage collection. Residents would simply throw their waste out of windows onto the streets below. It wasn't uncommon for pedestrians to be hit by flying debris or to slip on rotting food waste. Picture yourself trying to navigate these perilous streets after dark, with only the dim light of oil lamps to guide your way. One misstep could result in a twisted ankle or worse. But even if you managed to avoid the physical hazards, there were still plenty of human threats to contend with. Petty crime was rampant in ancient Rome, with pickpockets and thieves taking advantage of crowded marketplaces and narrow alleyways. More organized criminal gangs also roamed the streets, especially at night. These groups would often engage in violent turf wars, making certain neighborhoods no-go zones after dark. It's no wonder that wealthy Romans employed bodyguards to protect them when they ventured out. Imagine trying to enjoy a peaceful evening stroll, constantly looking over your shoulder for potential threats. It's a far cry from the leisurely walks we might take in our modern cities. Another aspect of Roman urban life that might surprise you is the noise pollution. Rome was a bustling metropolis with an estimated population of over 1 million people at its peak. The streets were filled with the constant clamor of commerce, construction, and transportation. Wagons with iron-rimmed wheels rumbled over stone streets, creating a deafening racket. Shopkeepers shouted to attract customers, while construction crews worked day and night on the latest imperial building projects. The din would have been relentless, making it difficult to find a moment of peace and quiet. Imagine trying to get a good night's sleep with the constant background noise of a city that never truly slept. It's enough to make you appreciate the relative tranquility of your own bedroom. Now let's talk about one of the most iconic features of Roman urban life, the public baths. While these facilities were certainly impressive and served an important social function, they weren't without their risks. The warm, humid environment of the baths was a perfect breeding ground for bacteria and parasites. Skin infections and fungal diseases were common among bathgoers. Moreover, the practice of sharing bathing water and communal scraping tools for cleaning the skin meant that diseases could spread rapidly. Picture yourself relaxing in a crowded pool, blissfully unaware of the microscopic threats lurking in the water around you. It might make you think twice about complaining about chlorine in modern swimming pools. Another aspect of Roman life that might shock modern sensibilities was the lack of privacy. Many Romans lived in insulae, multi-story apartment buildings that were often overcrowded and poorly constructed. These buildings frequently collapsed or caught fire due to shoddy workmanship and the use of cheap materials. Living in such close quarters meant that your daily life was on display to your neighbors. Arguments, family discussions, and even intimate moments were often overheard by those living next door or on the floors above and below. Imagine trying to have a private conversation or moment to yourself in such an environment. It's enough to make you grateful for the relative solitude of modern living arrangements. As we near the end of our exploration of ancient Rome's urban hazards, let's not forget about the ever-present threat of political instability. The city was no stranger to riots, coups, and civil unrest. The infamous Year of the Four Emperors in 69 AD saw Rome plunged into chaos as rival claimants fought for control of the empire. During times of political turmoil, ordinary citizens often found themselves caught in the crossfire. Loyalty to the wrong faction could result in persecution, property confiscation, or even execution. Imagine living with the constant anxiety that a change in political winds could upend your entire life. It's a stark reminder of the relative stability we enjoy in many modern societies. As we conclude our journey through the perilous streets of ancient Rome, you might find yourself feeling a new appreciation for the comforts and safety of your own time and place. While Rome was undoubtedly a marvel of its age, the daily life of its citizens was fraught with dangers that we can scarcely imagine today. So the next time you find yourself frustrated by a minor inconvenience of modern life, remember the citizens of ancient Rome. They navigated a world of fire, disease, crime, and instability with a resilience we can only admire from our comfortable vantage point in history. Sweet dreams, and be grateful for your smoke detectors, clean water, and relatively safe streets. As we continue our journey through the annals of history, let's turn our attention to the culinary practices of ancient Rome. The Romans had a complex and diverse relationship with food, one that reflected their society's structure and values. In ancient Roman society, food was more than just sustenance. It was a symbol of status, power, and cultural identity. The diet of the average Roman citizen varied greatly depending on their social class and wealth. Let's begin by exploring the staples of the Roman diet. Bread was a fundamental part of the Roman meal, consumed by all social classes. The type of bread, however, differed based on one's status. The wealthy enjoyed white bread made from wheat, while the poor typically ate darker bread made from barley or millet. This disparity in bread quality was just one of many ways that food reflected the social hierarchy in Roman society. Another staple in the Roman diet was a porridge-like dish called poules. Made from ground grains, typically wheat or millet, poules was a common meal for the lower classes. It could be flavored with cheese, eggs, or honey, depending on what was available and affordable. Vegetables played a significant role in the Roman diet as well. Common vegetables included cabbage, onions, garlic, turnips, and leeks. Legumes such as lentils, beans, and peas were also widely consumed, particularly by the lower classes, as they were inexpensive and provided necessary protein. Fruits were enjoyed by all social classes, with figs and grapes being particularly popular. The Romans also cultivated various fruits including apples, pears, plums, and cherries. Olives and olive oil were fundamental to Roman cuisine, used not only for cooking but also as a condiment and for lighting. When it comes to meat, the consumption patterns varied greatly between social classes. The poor rarely ate meat, perhaps enjoying it only during public festivals or religious celebrations. Pork was the most common meat consumed, followed by chicken and other poultry. Beef was less common, as cattle were primarily used for labor. Fish and seafood were popular among coastal communities and the wealthy. Fresh fish was a luxury, while preserved fish, such as garum, a fermented fish sauce, was widely used as a condiment across all social classes. Now let's delve into the dining practices of the Romans. The main meal of the day was called the cena, typically eaten in the late afternoon or early evening. For the wealthy, this could be an elaborate affair lasting several hours and consisting of multiple courses. A formal Roman dinner party, known as a convivium, was a significant social event. These gatherings were not just about food, they were opportunities for intellectual discourse, political discussions, and entertainment. The host's wealth and status were often reflected in the lavishness of the meal and the setting. The typical formal Roman meal consisted of three main courses. The first course, called gustatio or primulsus, was a light appetizer. This might include eggs, vegetables, or small fish dishes, often accompanied by mulsum, a sweet wine mixed with honey. The main course, known as primimensi, featured a variety of meat or fish dishes. This was where the host would showcase their wealth and culinary sophistication. Exotic meats like peacock, flamingo, or even dormice might be served to impress guests. The final course, secondi mensi, was essentially the dessert course. This typically included fresh or dried fruits, nuts, and sweet cakes or pastries. The Romans had a particular fondness for sweet foods, often using honey as a sweetener. An interesting aspect of Roman dining was the practice of reclining while eating. At formal dinners, guests would recline on couches arranged in a U-shape around a central table. This practice was adopted from the Greeks and was seen as a sign of luxury and refinement. The seating arrangement at these dinners was highly formalized and reflected social hierarchies. The most honored guest would recline in the place considered the highest status, typically to the left of the host. It's worth noting that this formal dining style was primarily reserved for the upper classes. The majority of Romans would have eaten their meals sitting at a table, much like we do today. The Romans also had their own version of fast food. For the urban poor who often lacked cooking facilities in their crowded apartment buildings, street vendors and small shops called thermopolia provided ready-to-eat food. These establishments served hot and cold foods and drinks, functioning somewhat like modern-day takeaways. Wine was the preferred drink of the Romans, consumed by all social classes. However, it was typically diluted with water, as drinking undiluted wine was considered barbaric. The quality of wine varied greatly, with the best vintages reserved for the wealthy. The Romans were also known for their use of various herbs and spices in their cooking. While native herbs like thyme, oregano, and rosemary were common, exotic spices from the far reaches of the empire, such as pepper from India, were highly prized and expensive. One particularly interesting aspect of Roman cuisine was the use of garum, the fermented fish sauce mentioned earlier. This pungent condiment was used to enhance the flavor of many dishes, much like we might use salt or soy sauce today. As we conclude our exploration of ancient Roman food and dining, it's clear that the culinary practices of this civilization were as complex and varied as the empire itself. From the simple meals of the poor to the extravagant feasts of the wealthy, food played a central role in Roman society, reflecting its values, social structures, and the vast reach of its empire. In our next segment, we'll continue our historical journey, venturing into another fascinating aspect of life in the ancient world. But for now, let the echoes of Roman feasts and the gentle clinking of wine cups lull you into a peaceful slumber. In ancient Rome, public baths were more than just places to get clean. They were social hubs, centers of relaxation, and symbols of Roman engineering prowess. Let's delve into the world of Roman bathing culture, where hygiene met leisure in grand architectural marvels. The concept of public baths, or thermae, emerged as Rome grew from a small city-state into a vast empire. These facilities were not just for the wealthy, they were accessible to citizens of all social classes, making them a cornerstone of Roman daily life. A typical Roman bath complex was a massive structure, often covering several city blocks. The largest and most famous of these was the Baths of Diocletian, built around 300 AD, which could accommodate up to 3,000 bathers at once. The Upon entering a bath complex, a Roman citizen would first encounter the apoditerium, or changing room. Here, they would undress and store their belongings in niches along the walls. Slaves or attendants might be present to guard possessions against theft, a common concern in these busy public spaces. From the apoditerium, bathers would typically proceed to the palestra, an open courtyard used for exercise. Here, Romans would engage in various physical activities to work up a sweat before bathing. Wrestling, weightlifting, and ball games were popular choices. After exercising, bathers would move to the tepidarium, or warm room. This space served as a transition between the cooler outer areas and the hot inner chambers. The tepidarium was heated by a hypocaust system, an ingenious Roman invention consisting of raised floors with hot air circulating beneath. Next came the caldarium, or hot room. This was the hottest area of the baths, with temperatures reaching up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Here, bathers would sweat profusely, opening their pores and cleansing their skin. The caldarium often featured a large pool of hot water for soaking. For those seeking an even more intense heat experience, there was the laconicum, a dry sweating room similar to a modern sauna. This circular room was topped by a domed ceiling with an opening that could be adjusted to regulate the temperature. After thoroughly sweating, bathers would move to the frigidarium, or cold room. This area contained a large, unheated pool of cold water. The shock of plunging into the frigidarium after the heat of the caldarium was believed to be invigorating and health-promoting. Throughout the bathing process, Romans would use various tools and products for cleansing. A strigil, a curved metal tool, was used to scrape oil, sweat, and dirt from the skin. Olive oil was commonly applied before bathing as a cleanser and moisturizer. Public baths were not just about getting clean, they were also important social spaces. Romans would meet friends, discuss business, and engage in intellectual conversations while bathing. Some larger complexes even included libraries, lecture halls, and gardens. The baths were also showcases of Roman engineering and artistic achievement. Walls and floors were often adorned with intricate mosaics and frescoes. Statues of gods, emperors, and athletes decorated the halls and courtyards. Maintaining these vast complexes required significant resources and labor. A complex system of aqueducts brought fresh water into the cities, while large furnaces, tended by slaves, heated the water in the hypocaust systems. The importance of baths in Roman society cannot be overstated. Emperors often built grand bath complexes as a way to gain popularity with the public. The poet Juvenal famously stated that all the Roman people really wanted was bread and circuses, with baths being an implied third essential. As the Roman Empire expanded, bath culture spread throughout its territories. Remains of Roman baths can be found across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, testament to their cultural significance and the empire's reach. However, the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century AD led to the decline of public bathing culture in much of Europe. Many bath complexes fell into disrepair or were repurposed for other uses. In the Eastern Empire, centered in Constantinople, bath culture continued for several more centuries. The legacy of Roman baths can still be seen today. The city of Bath in England, named for its Roman-era spa, continues to attract visitors to its hot springs. The hammams of the Islamic world and the spa culture of modern Europe both owe a debt to Roman bathing traditions. In conclusion, the public baths of ancient Rome were far more than mere hygiene facilities. They were a reflection of Roman values, engineering skill, and social structure. These grand complexes served as meeting places, leisure centers, and symbols of Roman civilization, leaving an indelible mark on Western culture that persists to this day. As we journey through the annals of history, let's turn our attention to the entertainment of ancient Rome. The Romans, known for their grand architecture and military conquests, also had a rich culture of leisure and spectacle. One of the most iconic forms of Roman entertainment was the gladiatorial games. These brutal contests took place in massive amphitheaters, the most famous being the Colosseum in Rome. Imagine yourself seated among thousands of spectators, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of blood. Gladiators were often slaves or prisoners of war, trained to fight to the death for the amusement of the crowd. They wielded a variety of weapons, from swords and tridents to nets and spears. The games weren't just simple duels. They often featured elaborate reenactments of famous battles or mythological scenes. But it wasn't all about violence. The Romans also enjoyed chariot races, held in long, oval-shaped stadiums called circuses. The Circus Maximus in Rome could hold up to 250,000 spectators, making it the largest sports arena in history. Teams of horses would thunder around the track, their charioteers risking life and limb for glory and prize money. Theater was another popular form of entertainment in ancient Rome. Unlike the gladiatorial games, which were uniquely Roman, theater was heavily influenced by Greek traditions. Roman plays were often adaptations of Greek works, featuring comedy, tragedy, and mime performances. The Romans also enjoyed public baths, which were more than just places to get clean. These elaborate complexes served as social hubs where people could exercise, relax, and socialize. Some baths even had libraries and lecture halls, combining physical and intellectual pursuits. For the wealthy, dinner parties were a common form of entertainment. These lavish affairs could last for hours, featuring multiple courses of exotic foods, wine, and entertainment such as music, dance, and poetry recitals. It wasn't uncommon for these parties to continue late into the night. In the realm of sports, the Romans enjoyed various athletic competitions. While not as formalized as the Greek Olympic Games, Roman athletic contests included wrestling, boxing, and various forms of racing. These events were often held as part of religious festivals or public celebrations. Board games were popular among all classes of Roman society. One of the most common was a game called ludus latrincularum, similar to chess or checkers. Dice games were also widespread, despite periodic attempts by authorities to ban gambling. For those seeking intellectual stimulation, public lectures and debates were common in forums and other public spaces. Philosophers, poets, and orators would share their ideas and engage in lively discussions on various topics. The Romans also had a fascination with exotic animals. Public animal displays, sometimes involving hunts or battles between different species, were popular spectacles. These events often featured creatures from far-flung corners of the empire, such as lions, elephants, and even crocodiles. Religious festivals were another important source of entertainment in ancient Rome. These events often combined religious rituals with public games, feasts, and theatrical performances. The Saturnalia, for example, was a winter festival that involved role reversal between masters and slaves, gift-giving, and general merrymaking. Music played a significant role in Roman entertainment. Various instruments were used, including the lyre, flute, and hydraules, an early type of organ. Music was an integral part of religious ceremonies, theatrical performances, and private gatherings. For the literate population, reading was a popular pastime. Public libraries began to appear in Rome during the imperial period, making books more accessible. Poetry recitals were common events, with poets sharing their latest works with appreciative audiences. The Romans also enjoyed various forms of street entertainment. Jugglers, acrobats, and street performers would ply their trade in public spaces, providing amusement for passers-by. Fortune tellers and astrologers were also popular, offering glimpses into the future for those willing to pay. As we reflect on the entertainment of ancient Rome, it's clear that while some aspects may seem foreign or even barbaric to us today, many of their pastimes aren't so different from our own. The human desire for amusement, spectacle, and social interaction remains constant across the centuries. From the grandeur of the Colosseum to the intimacy of a private dinner party, Roman entertainment encompassed a wide range of experiences. It reflected the values, beliefs, and social structures of their society, just as our modern forms of entertainment do today. As we drift off to sleep, let's imagine ourselves walking through the streets of ancient Rome, the sounds of laughter and music drifting from nearby taverns, the distant roar of the crowd from the Circus Maximus, and the quiet rustle of scrolls in a public library. The world of Roman entertainment, both familiar and strange, surrounds us in our dreams. As we draw our journey through ancient Rome to a close, let's reflect on the stark contrasts between their world and ours. The Roman Empire, with its grandeur and brutality, shaped the course of Western civilization in ways we still feel today. Imagine yourself as an average Roman citizen. Your daily life would be a far cry from the comforts we enjoy in the modern world. The constant threat of disease loomed over you, with no understanding of germ theory or access to antibiotics. A simple cut could lead to a life-threatening infection. The streets of Rome, while impressive for their time, were far from the clean, orderly thoroughfares we're accustomed to. Open sewers ran alongside roads, filling the air with noxious odors. Waste disposal was rudimentary at best, contributing to the spread of illness and vermin. Your diet would be limited and often lacking in essential nutrients. While the wealthy enjoyed exotic foods and lavish feasts, the common people subsisted on a monotonous diet of bread, porridge, and occasionally some vegetables or small amounts of meat. Education, if you were fortunate enough to receive any, would be basic and often focused on practical skills rather than academic pursuits. The concept of universal education was non-existent, and literacy rates were low, especially among the lower classes and women. Speaking of women, their rights and freedoms were severely restricted compared to modern standards. They had little say in political matters and were often treated as property, passed from father to husband with limited autonomy. The concept of human rights as we understand them today was foreign to ancient Rome. Slavery was an accepted institution, with slaves making up a significant portion of the population. Their treatment ranged from relatively humane to brutally cruel, depending on their masters. Justice was swift and often harsh. The legal system, while advanced for its time, lacked many of the protections we take for granted today. Punishments were severe, and execution was a common sentence for various crimes. Despite these challenges, it's important to remember that the Romans made significant contributions to fields such as engineering, architecture, and law. Their aqueducts, roads, and buildings were marvels of engineering that have stood the test of time. The Roman legal system, while flawed by modern standards, laid the groundwork for many aspects of Western law. Concepts like innocent until proven guilty and the right to a fair trial have their roots in Roman jurisprudence. In politics, the Roman Republic introduced ideas of representative government and checks on power that would later influence modern democracies. However, it's crucial to note that their version of democracy was limited to a small portion of the population. The fall of Rome marked the end of an era, but its legacy lived on. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, continued for another 1,000 years, preserving and transmitting classical knowledge to future generations. As we conclude our exploration of ancient Rome, we're left with a complex picture of a civilization that was both inspiring and deeply flawed. Their achievements in art, literature, and architecture continue to captivate us, while their societal norms remind us of how far we've come in terms of human rights and equality. The story of Rome serves as a reminder of the cyclical nature of history. Empires rise and fall, leaving behind lessons for future generations to learn from. As you drift off to sleep, consider how the echoes of ancient Rome still resonate in our modern world, shaping our laws, languages, and cultural heritage in ways both subtle and profound. As we journey back through time, we find ourselves at the threshold of the Viking Age, a period that has captured the imagination of countless generations. This era, spanning roughly from the late 8th to the mid-11th century, was marked by unprecedented exploration, trade, and warfare. The Vikings, those fierce Norse seafarers, left an indelible mark on European history and beyond. Picture, if you will, the misty fjords of Scandinavia, where longships with dragon-headed prows await their next voyage. These were not mere barbarians, as often portrayed, but skilled navigators, traders, and craftsmen. Their influence stretched from the shores of North America to the steppes of Russia, and even to the glittering courts of Constantinople. The Viking Age was a time of great change and cultural exchange. Norse mythology, with its pantheon of gods like Odin and Thor, intertwined with the daily lives of these hardy people. Their legacy lives on in our language, place names, and cultural memory. As the first rays of sunlight pierce through the wooden shutters of your Viking longhouse, you stir from your slumber. The year is 950 CE, and you're about to experience a typical morning in the Viking Age. Let's explore the daily routines and challenges that awaited Norse people as they began their day. You open your eyes, finding yourself on a raised wooden platform that serves as your bed. The air is thick with the lingering scent of last night's hearth fire, mixed with the earthy aroma of the thatched roof above. Your body aches slightly from the hard surface, a far cry from the comfortable mattresses of modern times. As you sit up, you notice the rest of your family stirring around you. In a typical Viking longhouse, entire families, including extended relatives, would share the same living space. Privacy was a luxury unknown to most Norse people of this era. Your first task of the day is to rekindle the central hearth. This fire is not just for warmth, but also serves as the primary cooking area for the household. You carefully nurture the embers from the previous night, adding kindling and blowing gently until flames spring to life. With the fire crackling, you move to the door and push it open. The cool morning air rushes in, carrying with it the sense of the surrounding landscape, damp earth, salt from the nearby fjord, and the distinct aroma of livestock. Speaking of livestock, your next duty is to tend to the animals. Vikings kept a variety of creatures, including cows, sheep, goats, pigs, and chickens. You make your way to the animal pens, the ground muddy beneath your feet. The animals greet you with a chorus of bleats, moos, and clucks, eager for their morning feed. As you distribute hay and grain, you take stock of each animal's health. In the Viking Age, livestock was incredibly valuable, providing not just food, but also materials for clothing, tools, and trade. A single cow could be worth as much as 24 ounces of silver, a small fortune in those times. With the animals fed, you return to the longhouse where the women of the household had begun preparing the morning meal. The diet of Viking Age Norse people was simple but hearty. You might start your day with a bowl of porridge made from barley or oats, perhaps sweetened with honey if you're fortunate enough to have some. As you eat, you discuss the day's tasks with your family. In the Viking Age, there was always work to be done. Depending on the season, you might be preparing fields for planting, repairing fishing nets, or crafting tools and weapons. After breakfast, it's time to dress for the day. Your clothing is simple but practical, a linen undertunic, woolen trousers, and leather shoes. Over this, you don a woolen overtunic, cinched at the waist with a leather belt. This outfit is designed to keep you warm in the cool Scandinavian climate and allow for easy movement during your daily tasks. As you step outside once more, you take a moment to observe your surroundings. Your farmstead is likely part of a small village, with other longhouses and outbuildings dotting the landscape. In the distance, you might see the sails of ships in the fjord, a reminder of the Vikings' seafaring prowess. Your morning hygiene routine is simple by modern standards. You wash your face and hands in a basin of cold water, perhaps using a rough cloth to scrub away dirt. Teeth are cleaned by chewing on twigs with frayed ends, a far cry from the toothbrushes and pastes we're accustomed to today. With personal grooming complete, it's time to begin the day's main tasks. If you're a farmer, you might head to the fields to check on crops or repair fences. If you're a craftsman, you could be working on intricate metalwork or wood carving. Women might begin spinning wool or weaving cloth, essential skills in a society where most goods were homemade. As you work, you keep an eye on the horizon. The Viking Age was a time of frequent raids and conflicts, and even in your own territory, you need to be prepared for potential threats. Many Norse people carried weapons as part of their daily attire, ready to defend their homes and families if necessary. The morning progresses, filled with the sounds of labor, the rhythmic pounding of a blacksmith's hammer, the bleating of sheep being herded, the swish of scythes cutting through grass. The air is filled with a mixture of smells, the smoke from fires, the earthy scent of tilled soil, and the salty breeze from the sea. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, you pause your work for a quick mid-morning snack. This might be a piece of hard bread, some dried fish, or perhaps an apple if it's the right season. Meals in the Viking Age were simple affairs, with little of the variety we're accustomed to in modern times. You take this opportunity to quench your thirst as well. Water is the most common drink, but you might also enjoy some ale or mead if available. These fermented beverages were not just for enjoyment, they were often safer to drink than water, which could carry diseases. As you return to your tasks, you reflect on the community around you. Viking society was built on strong bonds of kinship and loyalty. Your neighbors are not just acquaintances, but potential allies in times of hardship or conflict. Cooperation was essential for survival in the harsh Nordic environment. The morning continues with its steady rhythm of work and small interactions. You might pause to greet a passing neighbor, discuss the weather, or share news from nearby settlements. Information traveled slowly in the Viking Age, and oral communication was the primary means of staying informed about the wider world. As the sun approaches its zenith, signaling the approach of midday, you begin to wrap up your morning tasks. The main meal of the day is typically eaten around noon, and you look forward to a brief respite from your labors. You make your way back to the longhouse, where the smell of cooking food greets you. The midday meal is usually the most substantial of the day, often consisting of a stew made from whatever meats and vegetables are available, accompanied by bread. As you settle down for your meal, you reflect on the morning's activities. Life in the Viking Age was challenging, filled with hard work and constant vigilance. Yet it also had its rewards, the satisfaction of a job well done, the comfort of close-knit community, and the pride of upholding your family's honor and traditions. And so concludes our exploration of a typical morning in the Viking Age. As we transition to our next historical period, remember that while the specifics of daily life may change dramatically across time and cultures, the fundamental human experiences of work, family, and community remain constant threads throughout history. As we journey back to the Viking Age, a period spanning from the late 8th to the late 11th centuries, we find ourselves immersed in a world quite different from our modern understanding of cleanliness and fashion. Let's explore the often misunderstood aspects of Viking hygiene and clothing, which might surprise you with their complexity and, in some cases, their unexpected attention to personal grooming. Contrary to popular belief, Vikings were not the unwashed, unkempt barbarians often portrayed in modern media. Archaeological evidence and historical accounts suggest that they had a more sophisticated approach to personal hygiene than many of their European contemporaries. Let's start with their bathing habits. Vikings typically bathed once a week, which was considered quite frequent for the time. Saturday, in Old Norse called Laugardagr, meaning bathing day, was the designated day for this weekly ritual. They would often use natural hot springs known as lager for bathing when available. In areas without hot springs, they heated water in large cauldrons for bathing. The Vikings also used a type of soap made from animal fat and wood ash. This soap, while not as refined as modern products, was effective in cleaning both body and hair. They would lather up and rinse off, often finishing with a plunge into a cold stream or lake, believed to invigorate the body and close the pores. Personal grooming tools have been found in many Viking archaeological sites. These include combs made from antler, bone, or wood, tweezers, ear spoons for removing earwax, and even primitive forms of toothpicks. The presence of these items indicates a culture that valued personal appearance and hygiene. Vikings took particular pride in their hair and beard care. Both men and women often wore their hair long, and it was common to braid or style it elaborately. Contrary to the wild, tangled image often portrayed, Viking hair was often well-maintained and even dyed. Blonde hair was particularly prized, and some Vikings used lye soap to lighten their hair color. Beards were also a point of pride for Viking men. They were carefully groomed and sometimes braided or decorated with beads. The care taken with facial hair was not just about vanity. In Norse culture, a well-maintained beard was often seen as a sign of wisdom and status. Now let's turn our attention to Viking clothing. The garments worn by Vikings were primarily functional, designed to withstand the harsh Scandinavian climate, but they also incorporated elements of style and status. The basic materials used were wool, linen, and animal skins. Wool was the most common material for outer garments. It was warm, water-resistant, and readily available from the sheep they raised. Vikings were skilled at spinning and weaving wool into different textures and weights of fabric. Heavier wool was used for winter cloaks and tunics, while lighter weaves were suitable for summer wear. Linen made from flax was used for undergarments and lighter clothing. It was more comfortable against the skin and easier to wash than wool. However, linen was more labor-intensive to produce and therefore often reserved for wealthier individuals or special occasions. The basic outfit for a Viking man consisted of a long-sleeved undertunic made of linen, covered by a woolen tunic that reached to mid-thigh. Trousers were worn underneath, often made of wool or leather. These could be tight-fitting or baggy, depending on personal preference and function. Women typically wore a linen underdress that reached the ankles, covered by a woolen overdress held up by decorative brooches at the shoulders. These overdresses, known as hangerocks, often had decorative embroidery or tablet-woven bands along the edges. Both men and women wore cloaks for additional warmth. These were usually made of heavy wool and fastened at the right shoulder with a brooch or pin. The left arm was left free for movement, which was particularly useful in combat situations for men. Footwear consisted of leather shoes or boots. These were often simple in design, made from a single piece of leather wrapped around the foot and secured with laces. In colder weather, they might be lined with fur or stuffed with straw for insulation. Accessories played an important role in Viking attire. Belts were used to cinch tunics and carry essential items like knives, pouches, and keys. Jewelry was worn by both men and women, not just for decoration, but also as a portable form of wealth. Arm rings, neck rings, and brooches were often made of silver or gold and could be used in trade if necessary. The colors of Viking clothing were more varied than one might expect. While undyed wool and linen were common, resulting in shades of white, gray, and brown, dyed fabrics were also used. The most common dyes came from plants, woad for blue, madder for red, and weld for yellow. More expensive dyes like purple from shellfish were reserved for the wealthy and nobility. It's worth noting that clothing often denoted social status. Wealthy Vikings would have garments made of finer materials, with more elaborate decorations and a greater variety of colors. They might also wear silk, which was imported from the East and highly prized. In terms of winter wear, Vikings were well prepared for the cold Scandinavian climate. They would layer their clothing, wearing multiple tunics and using fur-lined cloaks. Mittens and hats made of wool or fur were common, as were leg wrappings to provide extra warmth. The Vikings' clothing was not just functional, but also reflected their craftsmanship and artistic sensibilities. Embroidery was a common form of decoration, with intricate patterns often adorning the edges of garments. These designs could be geometric or depict animals and mythological scenes. In conclusion, the hygiene practices and clothing of the Vikings paint a picture quite different from the stereotypical image of dirty, fur-clad barbarians. They were a people who valued cleanliness, took pride in their appearance, and crafted clothing that was both practical and aesthetically pleasing. Their attention to personal grooming and the complexity of their attire reflect a sophisticated culture that understood the importance of both function and form in daily life. As we drift off to sleep, imagine the weekly ritual of a Viking family preparing for their bathing day, the careful braiding of hair, the selection of clothing for a special occasion, or the pride in wearing a newly woven tunic. These everyday aspects of Viking life remind us that despite the centuries that separate us, the desire for cleanliness and self-expression through appearance is a timeless human trait. As we continue our journey through history, let's explore the daily labor of the Viking Age. This period, spanning from the late 8th to the late 11th centuries, was characterized by intense physical work and a constant struggle for survival. The average Viking's day began at dawn, with the first rays of sunlight signaling the start of a long and arduous workday. Men, women, and children all had their roles to play in the community's survival. For Viking farmers, which comprised the majority of the population, the day started with tending to the livestock. Cows needed milking, sheep required herding, and pigs had to be fed. The sound of roosters crowing would echo across the settlement, mixing with the grunts and bleats of various farm animals. After the initial animal care, it was time for the first meal of the day. This typically consisted of leftover porridge from the night before, perhaps mixed with some fresh milk or buttermilk. Bread, when available, would be a welcome addition to the meal. With bellies somewhat full, the real work of the day began. During the growing season, which was painfully short in the northern climes, every able body was needed in the fields. Plowing, sowing, weeding, and eventually harvesting were all done by hand, using simple tools like wooden plows, iron sickles, and scythes. The soil in many Norse settlements was poor, requiring back-breaking effort to make it productive. Rocks had to be cleared, fields needed to be fertilized with manure, and constant vigilance was required to protect crops from pests and harsh weather. While the men worked the fields, women were equally busy with a multitude of tasks. They would spin wool into yarn, weave fabric on large looms, and sew clothing for the family. The click-clack of the loom and the whir of the spinning wheel were constant background noises in Viking households. Food preparation was another significant part of a Viking woman's day. Bread had to be baked, meat needed to be preserved through smoking or salting, and vegetables required pickling to last through the long, harsh winters. The smell of wood smoke and roasting meat would often fill the air around Norse settlements. Children were not exempt from labor. From a young age, they would be assigned tasks appropriate to their abilities. Young boys might help with herding animals or fetching water, while girls would assist their mothers with household chores and food preparation. In coastal communities, fishing was a crucial part of daily life. Men would set out in small boats before dawn, hoping to return with a good catch. The salty sea air and the creaking of wooden boats would be familiar sounds to these Norse fishermen. For those skilled in crafts, the day might be spent in workshops. Blacksmiths would hammer out tools and weapons, the rhythmic clanging of metal on metal echoing through the settlement. Woodworkers would carve everything from simple utensils to intricate decorations for ships and buildings. As the day wore on, the community would gather for the main meal. This was typically a thick stew made from whatever meat and vegetables were available, accompanied by bread and ale. The meal was a time for the community to come together, share news, and perhaps listen to a skald or poet recite tales of heroic deeds. But even after the main meal, work didn't cease. There were always repairs to be made, tools to be sharpened, and preparations for the next day to be completed. The long summer days of the north meant that work could continue well into the evening. For those living in more urban trading centers like Hedeby or Burka, the day might involve different kinds of labor. Merchants would be busy haggling over goods from far-flung lands, the air filled with a cacophony of different languages and the jingle of silver coins. Craftspeople in these towns would produce goods for trade, such as combs made from antler, glass beads, or finely worked jewelry. The delicate work required good light, so they would make the most of the long summer days to ply their trades. As the sun finally began to set, the Viking community would start to wind down. Final chores would be completed, animals would be secured for the night, and families would gather in their longhouses. The evening meal was often a simple affair, perhaps some leftover stew or porridge. By the flickering light of the central hearth, families might engage in quieter activities. Women would continue to spin or sew, men might carve wood or repair tools, and children would listen to stories of the gods and heroes. These stories, passed down through generations, were more than mere entertainment. They reinforced cultural values, explained natural phenomena, and provided a sense of identity and continuity for the Norse people. As darkness fell, most would retire to their beds, which were simple affairs, often just benches along the walls of the longhouse, covered with furs for warmth. The crackling of the dying fire and the soft breathing of family members would be the last sounds heard before sleep claimed them. And so another day in the Viking Age would come to an end, only for the cycle to begin again with the dawn. This relentless routine of daily labor was the foundation upon which Norse society was built, shaping their culture, their beliefs, and their legendary resilience. As we continue our journey through boring history, let's delve into the Viking Age and explore their meals and feasting habits. While you might imagine grand halls filled with rowdy warriors tearing into massive legs of meat, the reality was often far more mundane. Viking meals were typically simple affairs, centered around staple foods that could be easily grown or obtained in the harsh Scandinavian climate. Barley and oats were the primary grains, used to make porridge and bread. These were often supplemented with vegetables like cabbage, onions, and peas. Meat was not as abundant as popular culture might have you believe. While the Vikings did consume beef, pork, and lamb, these were often reserved for special occasions or wealthier individuals. More common protein sources included fish, especially herring and cod, which were plentiful in the North Sea and could be easily preserved through drying or salting. Dairy products played a significant role in the Viking diet. Milk from cows, goats, and sheep was used to make cheese and skyr, a type of yogurt that is still popular in Iceland today. These dairy products provided essential nutrients and could be stored for long periods, making them valuable during the harsh winter months. The Vikings also foraged for wild foods to supplement their diet. Berries, nuts, and mushrooms were collected from forests, while seaweed and shellfish were harvested from coastal areas. These foods not only added variety to their meals, but also provided important vitamins and minerals. Contrary to popular belief, the Vikings did not have potatoes or tomatoes, as these were not introduced to Europe until after the Viking Age. Their diet was limited to foods that could be grown or found in their local environment, which meant that meals could become quite repetitive, especially during the long winter months. Now let's talk about Viking feasts, which were indeed grand affairs, but not as frequent as you might imagine. These celebrations were typically held to mark important events such as weddings, funerals, religious festivals, or political gatherings. They were opportunities for Vikings to display their wealth, generosity, and hospitality. During these feasts, the food served was more elaborate than everyday meals. Whole animals might be roasted on spits, and exotic imported foods could be offered to impress guests. However, these luxuries were not representative of the daily Viking diet. The centerpiece of a Viking feast was often the drinking of ale and mead. These alcoholic beverages were not just for enjoyment, but also played important roles in social and religious rituals. Toasts were made to the gods, to fallen warriors, and to seal agreements between chieftains. The seating arrangement at feasts was highly structured, reflecting the social hierarchy. The host and most honored guests sat at the high table, while others were seated according to their rank and importance. This arrangement was crucial for maintaining social order and reinforcing political alliances. Feasts could last for several days, with guests expected to participate in various activities between meals. These might include storytelling, poetry recitations, music, and games. It was during these feasts that skalds or Norse poets would perform their elaborate verses, preserving history and mythology through oral tradition. While feasts were certainly more exciting than everyday meals, they were not without their challenges. The combination of heavy drinking, armed warriors, and long-standing rivalries could sometimes lead to conflicts. Many Norse sagas recount tales of feasts that ended in violence or political upheaval. It's worth noting that the archaeological evidence for Viking feasting comes primarily from the upper classes. The majority of Vikings, who were farmers and craftspeople, likely had much simpler celebrations. Their feasts might have been little more than slightly larger meals shared with family and neighbors. The preparation for these feasts was a community effort. Women played a crucial role in brewing ale, baking bread, and preparing other foods. This was a time-consuming process that could take weeks, highlighting the importance of these events in Viking society. One interesting aspect of Viking feasting was the use of trenchers, which were flat pieces of stale bread used as plates. After the meal, these bread plates, now soaked with juices and gravies, would be given to the poor or fed to animals, ensuring that nothing went to waste. As we drift further into our exploration of Viking meals and feasting, let's consider the long-term impact of their diet. The heavy reliance on grains and dairy, combined with a relative lack of fruits and vegetables, meant that many Vikings likely suffered from nutritional deficiencies. Dental problems were common, as evidenced by archaeological findings. However, it's important to remember that the Viking diet was not static. As they expanded their reach through trade and raiding, they encountered new foods and culinary traditions. Spices from the east, wines from the south, and new farming techniques all gradually influenced Viking cuisine over time. In conclusion, while Viking feasts may have been grand affairs, the day-to-day reality of meals in the Viking Age was far less glamorous. It was a diet shaped by necessity and environment, reflecting the challenges and ingenuity of life in medieval Scandinavia. As we move on to our next topic, let these thoughts of simple porridge and occasional feasts lull you further into relaxation. As we delve deeper into the Viking Age, let's explore the intricate social structures that defined Norse society. These hierarchies and social norms played a crucial role in shaping the Viking world, influencing everything from daily life to grand expeditions. At the top of Viking society stood the jarls, or chieftains. These were the noble class, often wealthy landowners who wielded significant power and influence. Jarls were expected to provide for their followers, host feasts, and lead in times of war. Below the jarls were the carls, the free peasants who made up the majority of Viking society. These were farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and warriors. While they didn't possess the wealth or status of jarls, carls enjoyed personal freedom and the right to bear arms. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were the thralls, or slaves. These individuals, often captured during raids or born into slavery, had few rights and were considered property. However, it was possible for thralls to earn their freedom through exceptional service or by buying their way out of bondage. The Vikings also had a complex system of laws and governance. The Thing, an assembly of free men, served as a combination of parliament and court. Here, disputes were settled, laws were made, and important decisions affecting the community were reached through consensus. Family and kinship played a central role in Viking society. Extended family groups, or clans, provided support and protection for their members. Blood feuds between families could last for generations, highlighting the importance of familial loyalty. Women in Viking society enjoyed more rights and freedoms compared to many of their contemporaries in other parts of Europe. They could own property, divorce their husbands, and even participate in trade. Some women achieved positions of power as landowners or merchants. The concept of honor was paramount in Viking culture. A person's reputation or honor was their most valuable possession. Actions that brought shame upon oneself or one's family could have severe social consequences, sometimes leading to exile or blood feuds. Religion was deeply intertwined with Viking social structures. The Norse gods were seen as active participants in daily life, and religious rituals were an important part of community gatherings. Priests and priestesses held respected positions in society, acting as intermediaries between the people and the gods. The Vikings had a rich oral tradition, with skalds or poets holding esteemed positions in society. These bards composed and recited complex verses that preserved history, praised leaders, and entertained audiences. Their works provide us with valuable insights into Viking culture and values. Education in Viking society was informal but effective. Children learned practical skills from their parents and community members. Runes, the Viking writing system, were taught to some, but literacy was not widespread. Instead, memorization and oral transmission of knowledge were highly valued. The Vikings had a complex gift-giving culture that helped maintain social bonds. Generosity was expected of leaders, who would distribute wealth among their followers to ensure loyalty. This system of reciprocity extended to all levels of society, reinforcing social ties. Trade played a significant role in Viking society, influencing social structures. Successful merchants could amass wealth and rise in social status. Viking trade networks extended far beyond Scandinavia, reaching as far as the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. The famous Viking longships were more than just vehicles for raids and exploration. They were symbols of power and prestige. Owning and crewing a ship required significant resources and manpower, reflecting the owner's social status and influence within the community. As Viking settlements expanded, new social dynamics emerged. In places like the Danelaw in England or Normandy in France, Vikings adapted to and influenced local social structures, creating unique hybrid cultures. The concept of the Viking warrior ethos, while often romanticized, was indeed an important aspect of their society. Bravery in battle, loyalty to one's lord, and a stoic acceptance of fate were highly valued traits that shaped social interactions and personal aspirations. It's important to note that Viking society was not static. Over the centuries of the Viking Age, social structures evolved, influenced by factors such as increased trade, Christian conversion, and changing political landscapes in Scandinavia and beyond. As we drift off to sleep, imagine the complex web of relationships, obligations, and aspirations that define life in Viking society. From the humble thrall dreaming of freedom to the ambitious carl seeking to rise in status, to the powerful jarl balancing the demands of leadership, each person played a role in this intricate social tapestry. As we draw our journey through the Viking Age to a close, let's reflect on the lasting impact these Norse seafarers had on the world. Their influence stretched far beyond their Scandinavian homeland, leaving an indelible mark on European history and beyond. The Vikings were more than just raiders and plunderers. They were skilled craftsmen, traders, and explorers who established complex trade networks across Europe and even reached North America centuries before Columbus. Their longships, masterpieces of naval engineering, allowed them to navigate treacherous waters and reach distant shores. In the realms of art and culture, the Vikings left behind intricate metalwork, elaborate wood carvings, and the famous runestones. These artifacts provide us with valuable insights into their beliefs, daily lives, and artistic sensibilities. The Norse sagas, epic tales of heroes and gods, continue to captivate readers and inspire modern literature and media. The Viking legacy in language is particularly noteworthy. Many words in modern English have Norse origins, such as sky, egg, law, and window. Place names across the British Isles, like those ending in by or thorpe, are testament to Viking settlements and influence. Politically, the Vikings played a crucial role in shaping medieval Europe. They founded the Duchy of Normandy in France, which later led to the Norman conquest of England in 1066. Viking rulers also established kingdoms in Ireland, Scotland, and parts of England, forever altering the political landscape of the British Isles. In Russia, Viking traders known as the Rus are credited with founding the first East Slavic state, Kievan Rus, which would eventually evolve into modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. This demonstrates the far-reaching impact of Viking exploration and settlement. The Viking Age also marked a significant period of cultural exchange. As they traveled and settled in new lands, the Vikings both influenced and were influenced by the cultures they encountered. This exchange led to the gradual Christianization of Scandinavia, as well as the adoption of new technologies and ideas from other parts of Europe and beyond. It's important to note that our understanding of the Vikings has evolved significantly over time. Historical research and archaeological discoveries continue to challenge stereotypes and provide a more nuanced view of Viking society. We now recognize the complexity of their culture, including their legal systems, social structures, and the important roles played by Viking women. The end of the Viking Age is generally marked by the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, where the English King Harold Godwinson defeated the invading Norwegian King Harald Hardrada. However, the influence of the Vikings didn't suddenly disappear. Their descendants continued to play important roles in European politics and culture for centuries to come. Today, the Viking legacy lives on in popular culture, from movies and TV shows to video games and literature. While these portrayals often romanticize or exaggerate certain aspects of Viking life, they speak to the enduring fascination we have with this dynamic period of history. As we conclude our exploration of the Viking Age, it's worth reflecting on how this relatively short period of history, lasting only about 3 centuries, had such a profound and lasting impact on the world. The Vikings remind us of the power of exploration, the importance of cultural exchange, and the complex nature of historical narratives. Their story is a testament to human ingenuity, adaptability, and the enduring legacy that a society can leave behind. As we drift off to sleep, let the echoes of Viking longships and the whispers of Norse sagas remind us of the rich tapestry of human history, where even the most distant past can still resonate with us today. As we drift further into our historical slumber, let's turn our attention to a period that transformed the world as we know it, the Industrial Revolution. This era, spanning roughly from the mid-18th to the mid-19th century, marked a pivotal shift in human history, reshaping societies, economies, and the very fabric of daily life. Picture, if you will, a world slowly awakening from centuries of agrarian routine. Smoke begins to billow from newly erected factories, the rhythmic clanking of machinery replaces the gentle sounds of nature, and cities start to swell with workers seeking new opportunities. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just about inventions and machines. It was a complete overhaul of how humans lived and worked. In the coming segments, we'll explore the key innovations, the social upheavals, and the lasting impacts of this transformative period. From the steam engine to the assembly line, from rural exodus to urban expansion, we'll uncover how the Industrial Revolution set the stage for our modern world. So settle in as we embark on this journey through time, where progress and change became the new constants of human existence. As the gentle hum of machinery lulls you deeper into relaxation, let's journey back to the Industrial Revolution, a time of great change and innovation. Close your eyes and imagine the world slowly transforming around you. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, a profound shift began to occur in manufacturing, agriculture, and transportation. This period, known as the Industrial Revolution, would forever alter the course of human history. Picture yourself in a small English town circa 1760. The air is crisp and the streets are quiet. Most people work from home or in small workshops crafting goods by hand, but change is on the horizon. As you drift deeper into sleep, envision the first factories emerging on the outskirts of town. These large buildings, with their tall chimneys billowing smoke, are a stark contrast to the cottage industries of old. Inside these factories, a new world of mechanization is taking shape. The rhythmic clank of machinery fills the air as workers tend to spinning jennies and power looms. These inventions dramatically increase the production of textiles, transforming the way goods are made. Let the steady sound of these machines soothe you as we explore the key innovations that drove this revolution. First, there's the steam engine, perfected by James Watt in 1769. This powerful invention would soon power everything from factories to locomotives. Imagine the hiss of steam and the turning of gears as these engines come to life. Their energy transforms industries, allowing for unprecedented levels of production and transportation. As you relax further, picture the evolution of iron and steel production. New techniques like the Bessemer process make it possible to mass-produce high-quality steel. This material becomes the backbone of the industrial age, used in everything from buildings to railroads. Speaking of railroads, let the gentle rhythm of a train on tracks guide you deeper into tranquility. The development of steam-powered locomotives and the expansion of rail networks revolutionized transportation and commerce. Cities begin to grow rapidly as people move from rural areas to find work in factories. Visualize the bustling streets, the rows of new houses, and the sense of opportunity and change in the air. But this era of progress also brings challenges. Working conditions in early factories are often harsh and dangerous. Children as young as 5 or 6 toil long hours alongside adults. The air in industrial cities becomes thick with pollution. As you drift closer to sleep, consider how these challenges eventually lead to social reforms. Labor movements emerge, fighting for better working conditions and fair wages. Laws are passed to protect workers and improve public health. The Industrial Revolution spreads beyond Britain, reaching continental Europe and North America. Each region adapts and innovates, contributing to the global transformation of industry and society. In the United States, inventors like Eli Whitney revolutionized agriculture with innovations such as the cotton gin. This machine, which quickly separates cotton fibers from their seeds, dramatically increases cotton production and, unfortunately, the demand for slave labor in the American South. As your mind wanders through this era of change, picture the great exhibitions that showcase the marvels of industry. The Crystal Palace in London, built for the Great Exhibition of 1851, stands as a gleaming symbol of progress and innovation. Inside, visitors marvel at the latest technological wonders. Steam-powered machines, intricate textiles, and revolutionary agricultural equipment fill the vast space. The world seems to be moving faster than ever before. Let the gentle echoes of this bygone era lull you deeper into relaxation. The Industrial Revolution isn't just about machines and factories, it's a transformation of human society and culture. New social classes emerge, the middle class grows, fueled by opportunities in business and industry. Meanwhile, a large working class forms, providing the labor that powers the new industrial economy. As you drift closer to sleep, consider how the Industrial Revolution changes daily life. Gaslighting illuminates city streets, making them safer and extending activities into the evening hours. The telegraph allows for rapid long-distance communication, shrinking the world in ways previously unimaginable. In homes, new consumer goods become available. Mass-produced furniture, textiles, and household items make their way into people's lives. The sewing machine, invented in the mid-19th century, revolutionizes both industrial and home clothing production. The rhythm of life itself changes. Where once the sun and seasons dictated work patterns, now the factory whistle and clock reign supreme. Time becomes a commodity, measured and allocated with increasing precision. As your breathing slows and your body relaxes, envision the environmental changes brought about by industrialization. Forests are cleared for timber and fuel. Rivers are harnessed for power and transportation. The landscape is reshaped to accommodate the needs of industry. Yet even as some natural resources are depleted, new forms of energy are discovered. Coal becomes king, powering the steam engines that drive the industrial age. Later, oil will emerge as a crucial resource, setting the stage for future technological revolutions. As you hover on the edge of sleep, consider the long-term impacts of the Industrial Revolution. It sets in motion trends that will shape the modern world: urbanization, globalization, technological innovation, and environmental challenges. The echoes of this era still resonate today. Our modern world, with its global supply chains, advanced technologies, and complex social structures, has its roots in the transformative period of the Industrial Revolution. As we conclude our journey through this pivotal time in history, let the steady rhythm of progress guide you into a peaceful slumber. The Industrial Revolution, with all its complexity and contradiction, has shaped the world we inhabit today. Sleep now, knowing that the story of human innovation and adaptation continues, always changing, always moving forward, even as you rest and recharge for the challenges and opportunities of tomorrow. As we delve deeper into the annals of history, we come across a particularly dark chapter of the Industrial Revolution: the widespread use of child labor. This practice, while unthinkable by today's standards, was commonplace in the 19th century, especially in factories, mines, and mills across Europe and North America. The Industrial Revolution, which began in the late 18th century, brought about significant technological advancements and economic growth. However, it also led to a surge in demand for cheap labor, and children became an easy target for exploitation. In the early stages of industrialization, children as young as 5 or 6 were put to work in various industries. They were seen as ideal workers due to their small size, which allowed them to navigate tight spaces in factories and mines, and their perceived ability to learn and adapt quickly to new tasks. The conditions these young workers faced were nothing short of appalling. They often worked long hours, sometimes up to 16 hours a day, in dangerous and unhygienic environments. The air in factories was often filled with dust and harmful particles, leading to respiratory issues and other health problems. In textile mills, children were tasked with cleaning and maintaining the massive machines. This work was incredibly hazardous, as their small hands could easily get caught in the moving parts of the machinery. Accidents were frequent, resulting in severe injuries and even deaths. Mining was another industry that heavily relied on child labor. Young boys, known as trappers, would sit in dark, damp tunnels for hours, opening and closing trapdoors to allow coal carts to pass through. The darkness and isolation had severe psychological effects on these children, not to mention the physical toll of breathing in coal dust day after day. Girls were not exempt from this exploitation. Many worked in match factories where they were exposed to toxic phosphorus fumes. This led to a condition known as phossy jaw, a painful and disfiguring disease that caused the jawbone to rot away. The meager wages these children earned were often essential for their family's survival. Many came from poor backgrounds, and their income, however small, made a significant difference in putting food on the table. This economic necessity made it difficult for families to prioritize education or seek alternatives to child labor. Education, for most of these working children, was a luxury they couldn't afford. Long working hours left little time or energy for schooling, perpetuating a cycle of poverty and limited opportunities for advancement. As awareness of the harsh realities of child labor grew, reformers began to advocate for change. In the United Kingdom, a series of factory acts were passed throughout the 19th century, gradually improving working conditions and limiting the hours children could work. One notable reformer was Lord Ashley, later known as the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury. He championed the cause of child workers and was instrumental in passing the Mines and Collieries Act of 1842, which prohibited children under 10 and women from working underground in mines. In the United States, similar efforts were made to curb child labor. However, progress was slower, and it wasn't until the early 20th century that significant federal legislation was enacted to protect child workers. The National Child Labor Committee, founded in 1904, played a crucial role in raising awareness about the issue. They employed photographers like Lewis Hine to document the working conditions of children across various industries. Hine's powerful images helped galvanize public opinion against child labor. Despite these efforts, child labor remained a persistent problem well into the 20th century. It wasn't until the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 that the United States established federal standards for child labor, minimum wage, and overtime pay. The gradual elimination of child labor in industrialized nations was a result of multiple factors. Improved technology reduced the need for small, nimble workers. Economic growth allowed families to survive without relying on children's wages. And perhaps most importantly, societal attitudes shifted, recognizing the importance of education and the detrimental effects of child labor on physical and mental development. However, it's important to note that while child labor has been largely eradicated in developed countries, it remains a significant issue in many parts of the developing world. The International Labor Organization estimates that there are still millions of children engaged in hazardous work globally. As we reflect on this dark chapter of history, it serves as a reminder of the progress we've made in protecting the rights and well-being of children. It also highlights the ongoing need for vigilance and action to ensure that all children, regardless of where they are born, have the opportunity to enjoy their childhood, receive an education, and look forward to a brighter future. The story of child labor during the Industrial Revolution is a complex one, intertwining economic necessity, societal norms, and the gradual awakening of social conscience. It reminds us of the importance of balancing economic progress with human rights and dignity, a lesson that continues to resonate in our globalized world today. As we delve deeper into the annals of history, let's turn our attention to a period that dramatically reshaped society, the Industrial Revolution. While often celebrated for its technological advancements, this era also brought about unprecedented challenges, particularly in the realm of urban living conditions. Let's explore the grim reality of urban squalor during this transformative time. Picture, if you will, a city in the throes of rapid industrialization. Smoke billows from countless factory chimneys, blanketing the sky in a perpetual haze. The air is thick with soot and the acrid smell of coal burning. This is the backdrop against which millions of people lived their daily lives during the Industrial Revolution. As rural workers flocked to cities in search of employment in the burgeoning factories, urban populations exploded. London, for instance, grew from about 1 million inhabitants in 1800 to over 6 million by 1900. This sudden influx of people created an unprecedented housing crisis. Cities were ill-equipped to handle such rapid growth, leading to overcrowding and the development of slums. In these densely packed neighborhoods, families often shared single-room dwellings, with multiple people crammed into spaces barely large enough for one. Privacy was a luxury few could afford. Imagine trying to sleep in a room where you could reach out and touch your neighbors on either side. The concept of personal space was virtually non-existent for the working class during this period. Sanitation was another critical issue plaguing urban areas. The lack of proper sewage systems meant that human waste often flowed freely in the streets. In many cities, open sewers ran alongside roads, creating not just an unbearable stench but also a breeding ground for disease. Cholera, typhoid, and other waterborne illnesses were rampant, claiming countless lives. The Thames in London became so polluted that it was dubbed the Great Stink in the summer of 1858. The smell was so overpowering that it forced Parliament to adjourn. This crisis eventually led to the construction of London's modern sewer system, but not before thousands had succumbed to disease. Clean water was a scarce commodity in these urban centers. Many residents relied on communal pumps or wells, which were often contaminated. The concept of indoor plumbing was still a distant dream for most of the working class. Imagine having to trek through filthy streets just to fetch water for drinking and cooking, never quite sure if it was safe to consume. The air quality in industrial cities was abysmal. Coal-burning factories and domestic fireplaces filled the air with thick smoke and harmful particles. Respiratory diseases were common, and the term pea souper was coined to describe the dense, often yellowish smog that frequently enveloped cities like London. During particularly bad episodes, visibility could be reduced to mere feet, making navigation through city streets a hazardous endeavor. Children were not spared from the harsh realities of urban life during the Industrial Revolution. Child labor was widespread, with young boys and girls working long hours in dangerous factory conditions. Many children as young as 5 or 6 would work 12 to 14-hour days, operating heavy machinery or crawling into tight spaces to clean equipment. The toll on their health and development was severe, with many suffering from stunted growth and chronic illnesses. Education was a luxury that many working-class families couldn't afford. Children were often seen as additional sources of income rather than individuals in need of schooling. This perpetuated a cycle of poverty and limited social mobility, trapping generations in the same dire circumstances. The disparity between the living conditions of the working class and the wealthy was stark. While the poor suffered in cramped, unsanitary conditions, the upper classes enjoyed spacious homes with gardens, often in areas far removed from the industrial centers. This inequality fueled social tensions and eventually led to calls for reform. It wasn't until the latter half of the 19th century that significant efforts were made to address these issues. Public health initiatives, housing reforms, and labor laws slowly began to improve conditions for urban dwellers. The Public Health Act of 1875 in Britain, for example, mandated that new residential construction include running water and an internal drainage system. Despite these improvements, the legacy of urban squalor during the Industrial Revolution lingered well into the 20th century. The slums of cities like New York, Chicago, and Manchester remained notorious for their poor living conditions long after the initial industrial boom had subsided. As we reflect on this period, it's important to recognize that the technological progress of the Industrial Revolution came at a significant human cost. The urban squalor that developed during this time serves as a stark reminder of the importance of sustainable urban planning and the need for social reforms to accompany economic growth. The lessons learned from this dark chapter in urban history have shaped modern city planning and public health policies. Today's emphasis on green spaces, air quality control, and proper sanitation can be traced back to the reactions against the dire conditions of the Industrial Revolution. As we conclude this segment on urban squalor during the Industrial Revolution, let us appreciate the comforts of modern living that we often take for granted. Clean water, proper sanitation, and regulations protecting workers' rights and children's welfare are all in part responses to the harsh realities of this transformative period in history. As we drift further into our historical slumber, let's turn our attention to the Industrial Revolution, a period of rapid technological advancement that brought with it a host of workplace dangers. Close your eyes and imagine the bustling factories of the 19th century, where the hum of machinery never ceased. In the textile mills, workers navigated a maze of spinning jennies and power looms. The constant clatter of machinery was deafening, often leading to permanent hearing loss, but that was the least of their worries. Imagine being a young child, no more than 8 or 9 years old, tasked with crawling beneath the enormous machines to clear away cotton debris. One wrong move and you could be caught in the gears, your small body crushed or mangled beyond recognition. The air in these mills was thick with cotton fibers, creating a suffocating atmosphere. Workers inhaled these particles day after day, developing a condition known as bisonosis, or brown lung disease. Their lungs gradually filled with cotton dust, making each breath a struggle. Let's drift over to the coal mines, where darkness enveloped workers for hours on end. Miners descended into the earth, guided only by the flickering light of their lamps. The constant threat of cave-ins loomed over them, the earth above ready to collapse at any moment. The air in these mines was laden with coal dust, silica, and other harmful particles. Miners developed pneumoconiosis, commonly known as black lung disease, their lungs turning as dark as the coal they extracted. But it wasn't just the dust that posed a danger. Pockets of methane gas, odorless and invisible, could ignite with a single spark from a miner's tool. Explosions rocked the underground tunnels, claiming countless lives in an instant. In the iron and steel mills, workers faced a different kind of hell. Imagine standing before a blast furnace, waves of intense heat washing over you as molten metal poured into molds. One misstep, one splash of that liquid fire, and your flesh would melt away in seconds. The air in these mills was filled with metal dust and toxic fumes. Workers breathed in these pollutants, their lungs scarred by the microscopic particles. Many developed chronic respiratory issues, their bodies worn down by years of exposure. Let's not forget the chemical factories, where workers handled caustic substances with little to no protection. Imagine dipping your hands into vats of sulfuric acid or breathing in chlorine gas, your skin blistering and your lungs burning with each inhalation. In the match factories, workers, often young women, were exposed to white phosphorus. This toxic substance caused a horrific condition known as phossy jaw, where the jawbone would literally rot away, leaving the victim disfigured and in constant agony. The railroads, symbols of progress, were also sites of immense danger. Imagine being a brakeman, tasked with manually stopping a train by running along the top of moving cars and turning brake wheels. One slip and you fall to your death or be crushed between cars. In the slaughterhouses and meatpacking plants, workers wielded sharp knives in cramped, slippery conditions. The floors ran red with blood and offal, creating a treacherous environment where a single misstep could lead to severe injury or death. The concept of workplace safety was virtually non-existent. There were no hard hats, no safety goggles, no protective gear of any kind. Workers were considered expendable, easily replaced if they were injured or killed on the job. Child labor was rampant, with young bodies seen as perfect for squeezing into tight spaces or operating small machinery. These children, some as young as 5 or 6, worked long hours in dangerous conditions, their childhood stolen by the relentless march of industry. Working hours were brutally long, often stretching to 14 or 16 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week. Exhaustion led to accidents, as weary workers made fatal mistakes in their fatigue-induced haze. Imagine the toll this took on the human body. Workers aged prematurely, their bodies broken by years of back-breaking labor and exposure to harmful substances. Many didn't live to see old age, their lives cut short by the very jobs that were meant to sustain them. It wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that labor movements began to gain traction, fighting for better working conditions and shorter hours. Slowly, painfully, reforms were enacted, but not before countless lives had been sacrificed on the altar of industrial progress. As you drift deeper into sleep, consider how far we've come in workplace safety. The dangers of the Industrial Revolution may seem distant now, but they serve as a stark reminder of the human cost of unchecked industrial growth. Let the rhythmic hum of history lull you into a peaceful slumber, grateful for the protections we now take for granted. As we delve deeper into the Industrial Revolution, let's explore the social conditions that emerged during this transformative period. The rapid industrialization and urbanization brought about significant changes in the way people lived and worked, often with dire consequences for the working class. In the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, factory owners and industrialists prioritized profit over the well-being of their workers. This led to the development of overcrowded, unsanitary living conditions in rapidly expanding urban areas. Workers flocked to cities in search of employment, resulting in the creation of densely populated slums. These slums, often referred to as rookeries in England, were characterized by cramped, poorly constructed housing with little to no sanitation. Families would often share single rooms, with multiple people sleeping in the same bed. The lack of proper sewage systems and clean water sources led to the spread of diseases such as cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis. The working conditions in factories were equally appalling. Workers, including children as young as 5 or 6, were subjected to long hours, often working 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. The factory environment was hazardous, with dangerous machinery, poor lighting, and inadequate ventilation. Accidents were common, and workers who were injured or became ill often lost their jobs without compensation. Child labor was particularly prevalent during this period. Factory owners preferred to employ children because they could be paid less and were seen as more manageable than adult workers. These young laborers were often subjected to physical abuse and worked in conditions that stunted their growth and development. The exploitation of workers led to the emergence of social reformers and labor movements. Figures such as Robert Owen in Britain and Horace Mann in the United States began advocating for better working conditions, education, and social welfare. These efforts eventually led to the passage of various labor laws and regulations aimed at improving the lives of workers. One significant development was the creation of trade unions. These organizations allowed workers to collectively bargain for better wages, shorter working hours, and improved conditions. However, the formation of unions was initially met with strong resistance from factory owners and governments, often leading to violent confrontations and strikes. The Industrial Revolution also had a profound impact on family structures and gender roles. As men increasingly left home to work in factories, women often took on the dual responsibility of managing the household and contributing to the family income through piecework or factory labor. This shift challenged traditional gender norms and laid the groundwork for future women's rights movements. Education during this period was limited and often inaccessible to the working class. However, as the need for a more skilled workforce grew, efforts to improve education began to take shape. The introduction of compulsory education laws in many industrialized countries towards the end of the 19th century marked a significant step forward in addressing social inequalities. The rapid urbanization brought about by the Industrial Revolution also led to significant environmental problems. Cities became choked with smoke from factories and domestic coal fires, leading to poor air quality and respiratory issues for urban dwellers. The lack of proper waste management systems resulted in polluted waterways and streets, further exacerbating health problems. Despite these challenges, the Industrial Revolution also brought about some positive social changes. The increased production of goods made many items more affordable and accessible to a broader range of people. This led to improvements in the standard of living for some segments of society, particularly the emerging middle class. The development of new technologies and industries also created new job opportunities and professions. Engineers, mechanics, and other skilled workers found themselves in high demand, leading to the growth of technical education and apprenticeship programs. The social impact of the Industrial Revolution extended beyond the working class. The newly wealthy industrialists and factory owners formed a new social class, challenging the traditional aristocracy. This shift in social structures would have long-lasting effects on politics and culture in industrialized nations. As awareness of the harsh living and working conditions grew, various social movements emerged. Philanthropists and religious organizations established charities and social programs aimed at alleviating poverty and improving education. These efforts laid the foundation for modern social welfare systems. The Industrial Revolution also had a significant impact on public health. The concentration of people in urban areas, combined with poor sanitation and working conditions, led to outbreaks of diseases. This prompted advancements in medical knowledge and the development of public health initiatives, such as the creation of sewage systems and the implementation of vaccination programs. As we reflect on the social conditions of the Industrial Revolution, it's important to recognize that while this period brought about tremendous economic growth and technological advancements, it also created significant social challenges. The struggle for workers' rights, improved living conditions, and social equality that began during this era continues to shape our modern world. In our next segment, we'll explore how the Industrial Revolution influenced art and literature, as artists and writers grappled with the rapidly changing world around them. But for now, let the gentle hum of progress lull you into a peaceful slumber as we leave behind the bustling factories and crowded city streets of the Industrial Revolution. As we draw our exploration of the Industrial Revolution to a close, it's important to reflect on the profound impact this era had on the world we know today. The transformation from agrarian and handicraft economies to ones dominated by industry and machine manufacturing didn't just change how goods were produced, it reshaped entire societies, economies, and ways of life. The Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain in the late 18th century and spread across the globe, brought about unprecedented economic growth and technological advancements. However, it also introduced new challenges and complexities that continue to influence our modern world. One of the most significant legacies of the Industrial Revolution was the rise of urbanization. As factories and mills sprung up in cities, people flocked from rural areas in search of work. This mass migration led to the rapid growth of urban centers, often resulting in overcrowded and unsanitary living conditions for the working class. The stark contrast between the wealthy factory owners and the impoverished workers gave rise to new social tensions and class consciousness. The development of new manufacturing processes and the increasing use of machinery led to a dramatic increase in productivity. This surge in output transformed global trade and commerce, creating new markets and economic opportunities. However, it also led to the exploitation of workers, including women and children, who often endured long hours, dangerous working conditions, and meager wages. The environmental impact of the Industrial Revolution was equally profound. The increased use of fossil fuels, particularly coal, to power steam engines and factories, marked the beginning of large-scale air and water pollution. This set the stage for the environmental challenges we face today, including climate change and the need for sustainable development. On the positive side, the Industrial Revolution spurred numerous technological innovations that have become integral to modern life. The development of steam power, for instance, revolutionized transportation with the introduction of railways and steamships. This not only facilitated the movement of goods and people, but also contributed to the spread of ideas and cultural exchange on a global scale. The era also saw significant advancements in communication technologies. The invention of the telegraph in the 1830s dramatically reduced the time it took for information to travel across long distances, paving the way for our current age of instant global communication. The Industrial Revolution had a profound impact on education as well. The need for a skilled workforce to operate and maintain the new machinery led to the expansion of public education systems. This democratization of knowledge played a crucial role in social mobility and the spread of literacy. In the realm of medicine and public health, the Industrial Revolution brought both challenges and advancements. While urban crowding and poor working conditions initially led to the spread of diseases, the period also saw significant progress in medical knowledge and practices. The development of vaccines, improvements in sanitation, and advancements in surgical techniques all contributed to increased life expectancy and better overall health. As we conclude our discussion of the Industrial Revolution, it's clear that its effects were far-reaching and complex. It set in motion processes of technological innovation, economic growth, and social change that continue to shape our world today. The lessons learned from this transformative period, both its triumphs and its pitfalls, remain relevant as we navigate the challenges of our own era of rapid technological change and globalization. The Industrial Revolution serves as a reminder of humanity's capacity for innovation and adaptation, as well as the importance of balancing progress with social and environmental responsibility. As we face the challenges of the 21st century, including automation, artificial intelligence, and climate change, the experiences of the Industrial Revolution offer valuable insights into managing large-scale societal transformation. As we sail through the tranquil waters of history, let's anchor our thoughts on a time of adventure, danger, and untold riches. Welcome to the Golden Age of Piracy, a period that captures the imagination and lulls us into dreams of high seas escapades. This era, spanning roughly from the 1650s to the 1730s, saw the rise of legendary figures like Blackbeard, Anne Bonny, and Bartholomew Roberts. Picture yourself on a creaking wooden ship, the salt spray misting your face as you gaze out at the endless horizon. The Golden Age of Piracy wasn't just about buried treasure and swashbuckling duels. It was a complex time of political upheaval, economic shifts, and cultural clashes. Pirates emerged as both villains and folk heroes, challenging the established order and carving out their own brutal form of freedom on the high seas. As we delve deeper into this fascinating period, remember that the reality of pirate life was far from the romanticized tales we often hear. It was a world of harsh conditions, constant danger, and uncertain futures. So, let the gentle rocking of our imaginary ship lull you into a peaceful state as we explore the true nature of the pirate golden age. As we sail through the annals of maritime history, let's drop anchor in the golden age of piracy, a period that spanned from the 1650s to the 1730s. Life aboard a pirate ship during this era was far from the romanticized tales we often hear. Instead, it was a world of harsh realities, strict codes, and constant danger. Imagine, if you will, the creaking of wooden planks beneath your feet, the salty spray of the sea on your face, and the ever-present scent of tar and unwashed bodies. This was the daily reality for pirates who called their ships home. These vessels, often captured from merchant or naval fleets, were transformed into floating fortresses of lawlessness. The typical pirate ship was a hive of activity, with a strict hierarchy in place. At the top was the captain, elected by the crew and granted near-absolute authority during times of battle or chase. However, unlike naval captains, pirate captains could be voted out if the crew felt they weren't up to the task. Below the captain was the quartermaster, a position of great importance. The quartermaster was responsible for maintaining order on the ship, dividing plunder, and often acted as a check on the captain's power. He settled disputes among the crew and ensured that the ship's articles, a set of rules governing behavior and division of spoils, were followed to the letter. Speaking of the ship's articles, these were a crucial aspect of pirate life. Each crew member was required to sign these articles upon joining, agreeing to abide by the rules set forth. These might include prohibitions on gambling, fighting on board, or bringing women onto the ship. Punishments for breaking these rules could be severe, ranging from marooning to death. The daily routine on a pirate ship was far from idle. Crew members were assigned various tasks essential to keeping the vessel seaworthy. Some manned the sails, adjusting them to catch the wind just right. Others were responsible for cleaning the deck, a never-ending task in the salt-laden air of the open ocean. Below decks, the ship's carpenter worked tirelessly to repair any damage and keep the hull watertight. The cook, often a position given to older or disabled pirates, prepared meals in the galley. These meals were typically simple fare, salted meat, hardtack biscuits, and when available, fresh fish or fruit. One of the most important roles on a pirate ship was that of the navigator. Using tools like the astrolabe, compass, and charts, these skilled individuals guided the ship through treacherous waters and towards potential prizes. Their knowledge of currents, wind patterns, and celestial navigation was crucial to the success of any pirate venture. Life aboard a pirate ship was not for the faint of heart. Cramped quarters, poor sanitation, and the constant threat of disease were everyday realities. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, was a particular scourge. Pirates would often raid settlements or captured ships specifically for citrus fruits to ward off this debilitating condition. Despite these hardships, many men chose the pirate life for the promise of freedom and wealth it offered. The strict class divisions of 18th century society held little sway on a pirate ship. Here, a former slave could rise to become a captain, and all crew members had a vote in major decisions. The promise of riches was another major draw. When a prize was captured, the spoils were divided according to a predetermined system. The captain and officers received larger shares, but even the lowest-ranked crew member could expect a portion far greater than they might earn as a merchant sailor or naval rating. However, this wealth came at a great risk. Piracy was a capital offense, and capture meant certain death. The sight of a naval vessel on the horizon could send a ripple of fear through even the most hardened crew. Pirates lived with the constant knowledge that their next battle could be their last. Entertainment on board was limited but creative. During calm periods, pirates might engage in games of chance, storytelling, or music. Many ships had musicians among their crew, and the sound of a fiddle or hornpipe was not uncommon on a pirate vessel. One particularly important ritual on a pirate ship was the sharing of grog. This mixture of rum and water was rationed out daily, serving both as a form of payment and a way to make the often putrid drinking water more palatable. The grog ration was a highlight of the day for many pirates, offering a brief respite from the harsh realities of their chosen life. As we drift through the mists of time, we can almost hear the shouts of "land ho" from the crow's nest, signaling the approach to a safe harbor. These ports of call were crucial for pirate ships, offering a chance to resupply, repair damage, and spend their ill-gotten gains. Places like Port Royal in Jamaica and Nassau in the Bahamas became infamous pirate havens. Here, pirates could find relative safety, along with taverns, brothels, and markets catering to their specific needs. These ports were also where many pirate crews were formed, with captains recruiting new members for upcoming voyages. As our journey through the golden age of piracy comes to a close, we're left with a complex picture of life aboard a pirate ship. It was a world of danger and opportunity, freedom and strict codes, where fortune could change as quickly as the direction of the wind. The legacy of these sea rovers continues to capture our imagination, even as we drift off to sleep, lulled by the gentle rocking of history's tides. As we sail through the annals of maritime history, let's dock our ship in the golden age of piracy, a period spanning from the 1650s to the 1730s. While often romanticized in popular culture, the reality of pirate life was far from glamorous, especially when it came to hygiene and health at sea. Picture yourself aboard a pirate ship, the salty breeze in your hair, the creaking of wooden planks beneath your feet. Now take a deep breath. That's right, inhale deeply. What do you smell? It's not the fresh ocean air you might expect. Instead, your nostrils are assaulted by a potent cocktail of odors that would make even the hardiest landlubber gag. Let's start with the basics, personal hygiene. Pirates, like most sailors of their time, had limited access to fresh water while at sea. This scarcity meant that bathing was a luxury rarely afforded. Instead, pirates would often go weeks or even months without properly washing themselves. The result, a buildup of sweat, grime, and salt that would cake their skin and clothes. Speaking of clothes, pirates typically owned only one or two sets of garments. These would be worn continuously, accumulating layers of dirt, sweat, and various bodily fluids. The fabric would become stiff with salt and grease, providing an ideal breeding ground for lice, fleas, and other parasites. Imagine the constant itching and discomfort of having these unwelcome passengers crawling over your skin day and night. But the challenges of hygiene at sea extended far beyond personal cleanliness. Let's talk about the ship itself. Pirate vessels, like most ships of the era, were breeding grounds for all manner of vermin. Rats were a constant presence, scurrying through the dark holds and gnawing on food stores. These rodents not only posed a threat to the pirates' limited food supply, but also carried diseases that could decimate a crew. And it wasn't just rats. Cockroaches, weevils, and other insects thrived in the warm, damp environment of a ship's hold. They infested food barrels, contaminating precious supplies and adding an extra protein source to the pirates' meals, whether they wanted it or not. Now let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the chamber pot in the cabin. Toilet facilities on pirate ships were rudimentary at best. Most ships had a couple of designated areas at the bow of the ship called the head, where sailors could relieve themselves directly into the sea. However, during rough weather or battles, these areas might be inaccessible. In such cases, pirates would resort to using buckets or chamber pots. Now, imagine the smell of these receptacles sloshing about in the confined spaces below deck, especially in hot, tropical climates. The stench would be overpowering, a constant reminder of the less glamorous aspects of pirate life. Water management was another crucial aspect of hygiene at sea. Fresh water was a precious commodity, carefully rationed and primarily reserved for drinking and cooking. This scarcity meant that cleaning of both people and the ship was often neglected. Decks might be swabbed with seawater, but this did little to truly sanitize the living areas. The lack of proper sanitation and hygiene had severe consequences for the health of pirate crews. Diseases spread rapidly in these close quarters. Dysentery, often called the bloody flux, was a common ailment caused by contaminated food and water. The symptoms were severe and debilitating, leaving pirates weak and dehydrated. Scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency, was another ever-present threat. Pirates, like other sailors, subsisted largely on salted meat and hard tack, a type of biscuit made from flour, water, and salt. This diet, severely lacking in fresh fruits and vegetables, led to the telltale signs of scurvy: bleeding gums, loose teeth, and wounds that refused to heal. Tropical diseases were also a significant risk for pirates operating in warm climates. Malaria and yellow fever, spread by mosquitoes, could decimate entire crews. These diseases were particularly feared because they could strike suddenly and with devastating effect, leaving ships undermanned and vulnerable. The cramped, unsanitary conditions on pirate ships also led to the rapid spread of skin infections. Fungal infections like ringworm thrived in the warm, moist environment. Boils, abscesses, and other bacterial skin infections were common, often exacerbated by the constant chafing of salt-encrusted clothing against unwashed skin. Medical treatment aboard pirate ships was primitive by modern standards. Ship surgeons, if present, had a limited understanding of germ theory and often relied on treatments that seem barbaric to us today. Bloodletting was a common practice, believed to balance the body's humors. Amputations were performed without anesthesia, using only rum as a disinfectant and painkiller. Despite these challenges, pirates did attempt to maintain some level of cleanliness when possible. Many pirate codes included rules about keeping the ship tidy and disposing of waste properly. Some captains enforced regular cleaning routines, recognizing that a cleaner ship meant a healthier, more effective crew. Interestingly, pirates who captured merchant ships often found themselves in temporary luxury. These prizes sometimes carried valuable cargo like soap, clean linens, and fresh food, all rare commodities in a pirate's daily life. Such captures provided brief respites from the grim realities of hygiene at sea. As we conclude our exploration of pirate hygiene, it's clear that the romantic notion of swashbuckling adventure falls short of the malodorous reality. The golden age of piracy was marked not just by daring raids and buried treasures, but by the constant struggle against filth, disease, and discomfort. The next time you find yourself daydreaming about life as a pirate, remember the less glamorous aspects we've discussed. The freedom of the open seas came at a high cost, one paid in sweat, grime, and often poor health. It's a reminder that history is not always as clean or simple as we might imagine, but rather a complex tapestry of triumphs and hardships, adventures and afflictions. As we sail through the annals of maritime history, let's turn our attention to the often overlooked aspect of pirate life, their diet. The golden age of piracy, spanning from the 1650s to the 1730s, was a time of adventure and danger on the high seas. But what fueled these notorious seafarers during their long voyages? Contrary to popular belief, pirates didn't subsist solely on rum and hardtack. Their diet was surprisingly varied, though not always appetizing by modern standards. Let's explore the culinary world of these seafaring rogues. First and foremost, we must understand that food preservation was a constant challenge on long sea voyages. Without refrigeration, pirates had to rely on methods like salting, drying, and pickling to keep their provisions edible. One of the staples of the pirate diet was ship's biscuit, also known as hardtack. These dense, dry crackers were made from flour, water, and sometimes salt. They were baked until rock hard, which allowed them to last for months or even years without spoiling. Hardtack was notoriously tough and often infested with weevils. Pirates would often dunk it in their beer or water to soften it before eating. Some even joked that the weevils added extra protein to their diet. Speaking of protein, meat was an essential part of the pirate diet, though it wasn't always fresh. Salted beef and pork were common provisions. These meats were heavily salted to prevent spoilage, which made them incredibly tough and salty. To prepare salted meat for consumption, it would be soaked in water or even seawater to remove some of the salt. Then it would be boiled to make it more palatable. This process often resulted in a dish called salt horse, a tough, stringy meat that was far from appetizing. Fish was also a significant part of the pirate diet, especially when fresh meat supplies ran low. Fishing was not just a means of sustenance, but also a way to pass the time during long voyages. Pirates would use nets or lines to catch fish, which could then be eaten fresh or preserved through salting or drying. Another important source of protein came from an unexpected place, sea turtles. These creatures were prized by pirates and other sailors for their meat and eggs. A large sea turtle could feed a crew for days, and its shell could be used to make tools or even as a makeshift boat in emergencies. Fruits and vegetables were harder to come by on long voyages, but they were crucial for preventing scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency. When possible, pirates would stock up on citrus fruits like limes, lemons, and oranges. These fruits were so valuable that they were sometimes used as currency in pirate trades. Other fruits and vegetables that could last for extended periods included onions, garlic, and dried beans. These not only added variety to the diet, but also provided essential nutrients. One vegetable that played a surprisingly important role in pirate nutrition was the humble cabbage. Sauerkraut, made from fermented cabbage, was a common food on pirate ships. Its long shelf life and high vitamin C content made it an excellent choice for preventing scurvy. Of course, we can't discuss pirate diets without mentioning alcohol. Rum was indeed a popular drink among pirates, but it wasn't just for recreation. The alcohol content in rum helped to purify water and prevent it from becoming stagnant during long voyages. Beer was another common beverage on pirate ships. It was often safer to drink than water, which could become contaminated during long journeys. The brewing process killed harmful bacteria, making beer a safer option for quenching thirst. Water was, of course, essential, but it was often the least preferred drink due to its tendency to grow algae and become unpalatable over time. To combat this, pirates would sometimes add a small amount of alcohol or vinegar to their water barrels to help preserve it. The ship's cook played a crucial role in pirate life. Not only was he responsible for preparing meals, but he also had to manage the ship's food supplies carefully. A skilled cook could make even the most unappetizing ingredients somewhat palatable, which was essential for maintaining crew morale. One popular dish on pirate ships was a stew called lobscouse. This hearty meal was made by boiling salted meat with ship's biscuit and whatever vegetables were available. The result was a thick, filling stew that could sustain the crew through long days of sailing and fighting. Another common meal was salmagundi, a salad-like dish made from chopped meat, eggs, vegetables, and whatever else the cook had on hand. This colorful concoction was often served as a treat when fresh ingredients were available. It's worth noting that the quality and variety of food on a pirate ship could vary greatly depending on their success in raiding other vessels. A successful pirate crew might enjoy luxuries like fine wines, exotic spices, and fresh fruits stolen from merchant ships. However, during lean times, the diet could become monotonous and unappetizing. In extreme cases, pirates might resort to eating rats or even leather from their shoes to survive. The challenge of maintaining a balanced diet at sea led to some interesting superstitions and practices among pirates. For example, some believed that eating the flesh of a shark would prevent them from drowning. Others thought that drinking seawater in small quantities could help stave off thirst. While these beliefs were unfounded, they highlight the constant struggle pirates faced in maintaining their health and nutrition during long voyages. As we drift off to sleep, imagine yourself on a creaking pirate ship, the smell of salt air mingling with the aroma of bubbling lobscouse. The gentle rocking of the waves lulls you into a peaceful slumber, dreaming of adventure on the high seas and perhaps a feast of fresh fruits and vegetables at the next port of call. As we sail deeper into the murky waters of pirate history, let's explore the harsh realities of discipline and punishment during the golden age of piracy. This era, spanning roughly from the 1650s to the 1730s, was marked by strict codes of conduct and brutal consequences for those who dared to break them. Contrary to popular belief, pirate ships weren't lawless free-for-alls. Many operated under a set of rules known as the Articles of Agreement or Pirate Code. These codes varied from ship to ship, but generally outlined the expected behavior of crew members, division of plunder, and punishments for various offenses. One of the most famous pirate codes was that of Bartholomew Roberts, also known as Black Bart. His articles included rules against gambling, fighting on board, and bringing women or boys onto the ship. Breaking these rules could result in severe punishment, including marooning or death. Speaking of marooning, this was a particularly dreaded form of punishment. Offenders would be abandoned on a deserted island or remote stretch of coastline with limited supplies. They were often given a pistol with a single shot, a bottle of water, and a small amount of food. The idea was to give the condemned pirate a choice between a quick death by their own hand or a slow, agonizing demise from starvation or exposure. Another common form of punishment was flogging. This involved tying the offender to the mast and whipping them with a cat-o'-nine-tails, a multi-tailed whip that could inflict severe damage. The number of lashes varied depending on the severity of the offense, but it wasn't uncommon for a pirate to receive dozens of lashes for relatively minor infractions. For more serious offenses, such as mutiny or desertion, the punishment was often death. Hanging was a common method, with the condemned pirate often strung up from the yardarm for all to see. This served as a grim reminder to the rest of the crew about the consequences of betrayal. Some captains were known for their particularly cruel and unusual punishments. Edward Lowe, for example, was notorious for his sadistic treatment of prisoners. In one instance, he supposedly cut off a captain's lips, cooked them, and forced the man to eat them before killing him. It's important to note that while these punishments may seem barbaric by today's standards, they weren't unique to pirate society. Naval and merchant ships of the time also employed harsh disciplinary measures to maintain order and prevent mutiny. One particularly gruesome punishment used by both pirates and navvies was keel hauling. This involved tying a rope around the offender and dragging them under the ship from one side to the other. The barnacle-encrusted hull would shred the victim's flesh, and if they survived the ordeal, they often died later from their wounds or infection. Pirates also had their own version of walking the plank, although this practice was less common than popular culture would have us believe. Victims were forced to walk off the end of a wooden board extending from the ship's side, plunging into the sea. While this might not seem as bad as other punishments, it often meant certain death due to shark-infested waters or the great distance from land. The threat of these punishments served as a deterrent, helping to maintain order on pirate ships. However, it's worth noting that in many cases, pirate crews had more say in their governance than their naval or merchant counterparts. Many pirate captains were elected by the crew and could be deposed if they were seen as too harsh or unfair. This democratic aspect of pirate life extended to the distribution of plunder as well. Most pirate codes included specific rules about how captured goods would be divided among the crew. This system was often more equitable than that found on merchant or naval vessels, where ordinary sailors received little compensation for their hard work and risks. Despite the harshness of their punishments, many sailors actually preferred life aboard a pirate ship to service in the Navy or on merchant vessels. The chance for wealth, more democratic governance, and better living conditions often outweighed the risks of piracy. One of the most infamous pirate punishments was reserved for those who surrendered without a fight or betrayed their fellow pirates to the authorities. These pirates turned informer would often face horrific deaths if recaptured by their former comrades. Captain Charles Vane, for instance, was known to have tortured and killed informers in particularly gruesome ways as a warning to others. It's also worth noting that while pirate justice could be swift and brutal, it was often more impartial than the legal systems of the time. On many pirate ships, all crew members were subject to the same rules and punishments, regardless of their background or position. This stood in stark contrast to the class-based justice systems of many European countries. The fear of punishment didn't just apply to the crew. Pirate captains themselves could face severe consequences if they failed to lead effectively or were seen as cowardly. In 1718, the crew of Blackbeard's ship, Queen Anne's Revenge, deposed him as captain after he ran the ship aground. While Blackbeard managed to talk his way out of punishment, other captains weren't so lucky. As we drift off to sleep, imagine the creaking of a pirate ship's timbers, the sound of waves lapping against the hull, and the distant cry of a lookout. In this world of adventure and danger, discipline and punishment were constant companions, reminders of the fine line between freedom and chaos that defined the golden age of piracy. As we sail through the murky waters of history, let's anchor our thoughts on the golden age of piracy, a period that saw the high seas become a battleground of naval combat and maritime lawlessness. This era, spanning roughly from the 1650s to the 1730s, was marked by daring raids, treacherous battles, and the constant struggle between pirates and naval powers. Picture yourself aboard a creaking ship, the salty sea air filling your lungs as you scan the horizon for potential targets or threats. The life of a pirate was far from the romanticized version we often see in movies. It was a brutal existence, fraught with danger at every turn. Naval combat during this period was a complex affair, combining strategy, firepower, and sheer audacity. Pirates often relied on swift, maneuverable ships that could outrun larger naval vessels. The most common type of pirate ship was the sloop, a single-masted vessel that could navigate shallow waters and make quick escapes. When engaging in combat, pirates would attempt to close the distance to their target quickly. Their goal was to board the enemy ship and engage in hand-to-hand combat, where their ferocity and numbers could overwhelm merchant crews. This tactic was known as crossing the T, where the pirate ship would position itself perpendicular to the stern or bow of the target vessel, allowing for maximum cannon fire while minimizing return fire. The weapons of choice for pirates included cutlasses, pistols, and boarding axes. These close-quarter weapons were ideal for the chaotic melees that ensued during boarding actions. Cannons, while crucial for disabling enemy ships, were often used sparingly due to the pirates' desire to capture ships and cargo intact. One of the most feared pirate tactics was the use of the Jolly Roger flag. This iconic black flag, often adorned with a skull and crossbones, was used to strike terror into the hearts of potential victims. Pirates would often approach their targets flying a friendly flag, only to raise the Jolly Roger at the last moment, hoping to induce surrender without a fight. Naval powers of the time, such as the British Royal Navy, struggled to combat the pirate threat. The vast expanse of the oceans made it difficult to patrol effectively, and many naval vessels were too large and slow to catch the nimble pirate ships. However, as the Golden Age progressed, naval tactics and technology improved, leading to more effective anti-piracy measures. One such measure was the introduction of dedicated pirate hunting vessels. These ships were often smaller and faster than traditional naval vessels, allowing them to pursue pirates into shallow waters and engage them on more equal terms. The most famous of these was the HMS Ranger, commanded by Woodes Rogers, who successfully suppressed piracy in the Caribbean and rehabilitated many former pirates. The naval combat of this era wasn't limited to pirates versus naval powers. Pirate crews often fought amongst themselves, vying for territory, resources, and reputation. These battles could be particularly fierce, as both sides were well versed in pirate tactics and had little to lose. One of the most legendary pirate battles took place in 1718 off the coast of North Carolina. Blackbeard, whose real name was Edward Teach, engaged in a fierce fight with Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy. The battle was brutal and bloody, ending with Blackbeard's death and the defeat of his crew. This engagement marked a turning point in the war against piracy, demonstrating that even the most fearsome pirates could be brought to justice. The Golden Age of piracy also saw the rise of pirate havens, such as Port Royal in Jamaica and Nassau in the Bahamas. These lawless ports provided safe harbor for pirates, allowing them to repair their ships, sell their plunder, and recruit new crew members. However, as naval powers increased their efforts to stamp out piracy, these havens became targets themselves. In 1718, Woodes Rogers arrived in Nassau with a royal pardon for pirates who surrendered and a fleet to deal with those who refused. This event, known as the Operation Clean Sweep, effectively ended Nassau's status as a pirate haven and marked the beginning of the end for the Golden Age of piracy. As we drift through these tales of high seas adventure, it's important to remember that the reality of pirate life was far from glamorous. Disease, malnutrition, and the constant threat of violent death were ever-present companions for those who chose this path. The average pirate career lasted only a few years before ending in capture, execution, or an early grave. The legacy of this era lives on in our collective imagination, romanticized by literature and film. However, the true story of naval combat during the Golden Age of piracy is one of desperation, innovation, and the clash between lawlessness and order on the high seas. As our journey through the Golden Age of piracy comes to a close, we leave behind the creaking timbers and cannon fire, sailing into calmer waters. The echoes of those turbulent times still resonate in our modern world, reminding us of an era when the boundaries of law and order were as fluid as the oceans themselves. As we draw our journey through the Golden Age of piracy to a close, let's reflect on the lasting impact these seafaring outlaws had on history and popular culture. The era, spanning roughly from the 1650s to the 1730s, left an indelible mark on the world's imagination. Despite their relatively short reign, pirates of the Golden Age became legendary figures, inspiring countless stories, books, and films. Names like Blackbeard, Anne Bonny, and Captain Kidd continue to captivate audiences centuries later. But why does this particular period hold such fascination for us? Perhaps it's the allure of freedom that pirates represented. In an age of strict social hierarchies and oppressive colonial rule, pirates operated outside the law, creating their own codes and societies. Many pirate ships were surprisingly democratic, with captains often elected by the crew and important decisions made collectively. The image of the pirate as a romantic rebel has persisted, even though the reality was often far more brutal and desperate. Life aboard a pirate ship was harsh, dangerous, and frequently short. Disease, malnutrition, and the constant threat of violence or capture made it a far cry from the glamorous portrayals we often see in media. Yet it's undeniable that pirates left their mark on history in more ways than one. They influenced naval warfare, with many navies adopting tactics and technologies first used by pirates. The concept of buried treasure, while largely a myth, has become an enduring part of pirate lore, inspiring treasure hunts that continue to this day. Pirates also played a role in shaping international relations and trade. Their activities forced nations to cooperate in unprecedented ways to combat the threat, leading to new laws and agreements. The impact on trade routes and colonial expansion was significant, as merchants and colonists had to adapt to the constant danger of pirate attacks. One of the most intriguing aspects of pirate culture was their approach to gender and race. While far from perfect, pirate societies were often more inclusive than the mainstream cultures of their time. Women like Anne Bonny and Mary Read became renowned pirates in their own right, challenging gender norms of the era. Similarly, many pirate crews included freed slaves and men of various nationalities, creating a diverse and multicultural environment. The end of the golden age of piracy came about due to several factors. Increased naval patrols, stricter laws, and better defended merchant ships made piracy increasingly difficult and dangerous. Many nations also offered pardons to pirates who agreed to give up their criminal ways, further diminishing their numbers. By the 1730s, large-scale piracy in the Caribbean had been largely suppressed, though it continued in other parts of the world. The Romantic era of swashbuckling buccaneers gave way to a new age of naval supremacy and colonial expansion. As we conclude our exploration of the pirate golden age, it's worth considering how this brief but intense period continues to influence us today. From the way we speak, with many pirate terms entering common language, to our concepts of adventure and freedom, the legacy of these maritime outlaws lives on. In the end, the golden age of piracy serves as a reminder of the complex nature of history. It was a time of cruelty and violence, but also of daring and a certain kind of rough democracy. It challenged the established order and left an outsized impact on the world, far beyond what its relatively short duration might suggest. As you drift off to sleep, imagine the creaking of a ship's timbers, the snap of sails in the wind, and the vast expanse of the open ocean. The age of pirates may be long past, but in our dreams and stories, the adventure lives on, a testament to the enduring power of this fascinating chapter in human history. As we journey back through time, let's explore the fascinating world of colonial America. This era, spanning roughly from the early 1600s to the late 1700s, was a period of immense change and growth for the fledgling European settlements in the New World. Picture yourself transported to this time of great uncertainty and opportunity. The colonies stretching along the eastern seaboard of what would become the United States were a diverse tapestry of cultures, religions, and ambitions. From the Puritan strongholds of New England to the tobacco plantations of Virginia, each colony had its unique character and challenges. Life in colonial America was far from easy. Settlers faced harsh winters, unfamiliar diseases, and complex relationships with Native American tribes. Yet despite these obstacles, they persevered, laying the foundations for a new nation. In the coming segments, we'll delve deeper into the daily lives of colonial Americans, exploring their customs, hardships, and the events that would eventually lead to revolution. So, close your eyes and let your mind wander to this pivotal time in history. As we journey further back in time, we find ourselves in colonial America, a period of great change and expansion. The frontier was awakening, and with it came a host of challenges and opportunities for those brave enough to venture into the unknown. In the early 18th century, the British colonies in North America were primarily concentrated along the eastern seaboard. However, as populations grew and resources became scarce, colonists began to look westward for new opportunities. This push into the frontier would shape the course of American history for generations to come. One of the key figures in this frontier awakening was Daniel Boone. Born in 1734 in Pennsylvania, Boone would go on to become one of America's most famous frontiersmen. In 1769, he led an expedition through the Cumberland Gap into Kentucky, blazing what would become known as the Wilderness Road. Boone's explorations helped open up the Kentucky frontier to settlement, despite fierce resistance from Native American tribes who saw their ancestral lands being encroached upon. The conflicts that arose from this westward expansion would have long-lasting consequences for both settlers and indigenous peoples. Life on the frontier was far from easy. Settlers faced numerous challenges, from harsh weather conditions to the constant threat of attack. They had to be self-sufficient, growing their own food, making their own clothes, and building their own homes from the materials available in the wilderness. One of the most iconic symbols of frontier life was the log cabin. These simple structures were relatively quick to build and provided sturdy shelter against the elements. Settlers would fell trees, strip them of bark, and notch the ends to fit together. The gaps between logs were filled with mud, moss, or clay to keep out drafts. Inside these cabins, life was basic but functional. A large fireplace would serve for both heating and cooking. Furniture was often handmade and minimal. Beds might be nothing more than piles of straw covered with blankets. Despite the hardships, many settlers found a sense of freedom and opportunity in this new life. The awakening of the frontier also saw the rise of new forms of commerce. Fur trading became a lucrative business, with trappers and traders venturing deep into unexplored territories to acquire valuable pelts. This trade not only brought wealth to many individuals, but also played a crucial role in mapping out new regions and establishing relationships with Native American tribes. However, these relationships were often complex and fraught with tension. While some Native American groups saw opportunities in trading with the newcomers, others recognized the existential threat posed by the ever-expanding settlements. Conflicts were frequent and often bloody, with atrocities committed on both sides. One of the most significant conflicts of this period was the French and Indian War, which lasted from 1754 to 1763. This war, part of the larger 7 Years' War in Europe, saw British colonists and their Native American allies pitted against the French and their own indigenous allies. The outcome of this conflict would have far-reaching consequences for the balance of power in North America. The British victory in the French and Indian War led to the expulsion of France from North America, but it also saddled the British government with significant war debts. The attempts to recoup these costs through increased taxation on the colonies would eventually contribute to the tensions that led to the American Revolution. As settlers pushed further west, they encountered new challenges and opportunities. The vast prairies of the Midwest offered rich agricultural land, but also presented difficulties for those accustomed to the forested landscapes of the East. New farming techniques and technologies had to be developed to cultivate these open plains effectively. The frontier awakening also saw the birth of new American myths and legends. Stories of larger-than-life figures like Davy Crockett and Mike Fink captured the public imagination, embodying the spirit of adventure and rugged individualism that came to be associated with the American frontier. These tales, often exaggerated or entirely fictional, nonetheless played an important role in shaping American identity. They celebrated qualities like self-reliance, courage, and a connection to the land that would become central to the American self-image. The awakening of the frontier also had profound effects on American governance. As new territories were settled, questions arose about how they should be administered and eventually admitted to the Union as states. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 established a system for creating new states that would shape the country's expansion for decades to come. This period also saw the emergence of unique frontier institutions. The circuit court, where judges would travel from town to hear cases, became a vital part of the legal system in sparsely populated areas. Similarly, circuit-riding preachers brought religious services to isolated communities, playing a crucial role in the spiritual life of the frontier. The frontier awakening was not without its dark aspects, however. The displacement of Native American tribes, often through violence or coercion, remains one of the most troubling legacies of this period. The concept of manifest destiny, which would later be used to justify westward expansion, had its roots in this early push into the frontier. As we drift off to sleep, let us reflect on this pivotal period in American history. The awakening of the frontier shaped not only the physical boundaries of the nation, but also its character and values. It was a time of great change, opportunity, and conflict, the echoes of which can still be felt in American society today. And so, as our journey through colonial America comes to a close, we leave behind the log cabins and unexplored territories of the frontier. Our next historical slumber will take us to new lands and new adventures, but for now, let the gentle rustling of leaves in a primeval forest lull you into a peaceful sleep. As we continue our journey through the annals of mundane history, let's turn our attention to the daily grind of colonial America. Specifically, we'll explore the thrilling world of household chores in the 17th and 18th centuries. Prepare to be mildly intrigued by the monotonous tasks that occupied the lives of our colonial ancestors. First on our list of colonial chores is the ever-exciting task of candle making. In an era before electricity, colonists relied on candles for light once the sun went down. But these weren't the scented, decorative candles we know today. Oh no, these were utilitarian light sources made through a process so tedious it might just lull you to sleep. To make candles, colonists would first have to collect large amounts of tallow, which is rendered animal fat, usually from cows or sheep. The process of rendering fat involved slowly heating it to separate the pure fat from any remaining meat or tissue. Can you smell that pungent aroma wafting through your colonial home? Nothing like the scent of melting animal fat to set the mood. Once the tallow was prepared, it was time for the real excitement to begin. Colonists would repeatedly dip wicks into the melted tallow, allowing each layer to cool and harden before the next dip. This process would be repeated dozens of times until the candles reached the desired thickness. Imagine the thrill of watching tallow slowly accumulate on a string. It's almost too much excitement to bear. But wait, there's more. For those who couldn't contain their enthusiasm for candle making, there was the option of using candle molds. These allowed for multiple candles to be made at once, truly the pinnacle of 18th century efficiency. The molds would be filled with melted tallow and wicks would be carefully centered. Then came the most exhilarating part, waiting for the tallow to cool and solidify. I can hardly contain myself just thinking about it. Moving on from the pulse-bounding world of candle making, let's explore another riveting colonial chore, laundry. In an age before washing machines, doing laundry was a task that could easily consume an entire day. Are you ready for this whirlwind of monotony? The laundry process would begin with heating large amounts of water over a fire. While waiting for the water to heat, colonists would sort their laundry. I know, try to contain your excitement. Once the water was hot, it would be poured into large wooden tubs along with homemade soap, often made from animal fat and lye. The clothes would then be agitated using a long stick or by hand, because nothing says fun like repeatedly plunging your hands into scalding hot, soapy water. After the initial wash, clothes would need to be rinsed multiple times to remove all the soap. This meant more heating of water, more pouring, and more agitating. The wet clothes would then be wrung out by hand, a process that required significant strength and endurance. I can almost hear the thrilling sounds of water splashing and colonial muscles straining. But we're not done yet. Once wrung out, the clothes would be hung to dry on lines or spread out on bushes. In inclement weather, drying would have to be done indoors near the fire. Can you imagine the suspense of waiting for your clothes to dry? The anticipation is almost unbearable. Let's not forget about ironing, or as it was known then, smoothing. Irons in colonial times were solid pieces of metal that were heated directly on the fire. Using these required careful timing and skill to avoid scorching the fabric. The constant risk of burns added an element of danger to this otherwise mundane task. Who needs extreme sports when you have colonial ironing? Now let's delve into the fascinating world of floor cleaning in colonial America. Without vacuum cleaners or modern cleaning products, keeping floors clean was a constant battle against dirt, dust, and debris. Are you sitting comfortably? Good, because this is about to get mind-numbingly dull. For homes with wooden floors, the primary tool was the broom, but these weren't the plastic bristled brooms we use today. No, colonial brooms were often made from bundled twigs or straw, tied together and attached to a wooden handle. The process of making these brooms was itself a chore, requiring the careful selection and bundling of materials. Imagine the thrill of foraging for the perfect twigs to sweep your floor. It's almost too much excitement to handle. Sweeping with these homemade brooms was a daily task, sometimes performed multiple times a day in busy households. The joy of pushing dirt from one end of the room to the other, only to have more tracked in moments later, must have been truly fulfilling for our colonial ancestors. But sweeping was just the beginning. For a deeper clean, floors would need to be scrubbed. This involved getting down on hands and knees with a brush and a bucket of soapy water. The water, of course, would need to be heated over the fire first, adding another thrilling step to the process. Can you feel the anticipation building? Scrubbing the floor was a test of endurance, requiring repeated back and forth motions to remove ingrained dirt and stains. The soap used was often homemade lye soap, which could be harsh on both the floors and the hands. But who needs soft skin when you have impeccably clean floorboards, right? After scrubbing, the floor would need to be rinsed with clean water to remove any soap residue. This meant more trips to the well or water pump, more heating of water, and more back-breaking work. The process would be repeated until the floor was deemed sufficiently clean. I can hardly contain my enthusiasm for this repetitive and physically demanding task. Now let's turn our attention to the riveting world of colonial food preservation. In an era before refrigeration, keeping food from spoiling was a constant concern and source of endless chores. Prepare to be mildly intrigued by the monotonous tasks involved in keeping food edible. One common method of food preservation was salting. This involved covering meat or fish in large quantities of salt to draw out moisture and prevent bacterial growth. The process required careful attention to ensure even coverage and proper drying. Imagine the thrill of watching salt slowly permeate a slab of meat. It's almost too much excitement to bear. Another preservation method was smoking. This required the construction and maintenance of a smokehouse, where meats would be hung and exposed to smoke from smoldering fires. The fires needed constant attention to maintain the right level of smoke and heat. Can you feel the suspense building as you wait for your meat to properly smoke? The anticipation is palpable. Pickling was yet another method used to preserve a variety of foods, from vegetables to eggs. This process involved creating a brine solution and carefully packing foods into jars or barrels. The joy of watching cucumbers slowly transform into pickles over weeks or months must have been truly exhilarating for our colonial ancestors. As we near the end of our exploration of colonial household chores, let's not forget the constant battle against pests. Without modern pest control methods, colonists had to rely on various home remedies and constant vigilance to keep their homes free of unwanted guests. Methods for pest control included strewing herbs like mint or lavender around the house, using ash or diatomaceous earth to deter insects, and setting traps for rodents. The thrill of checking your homemade mouse traps each morning must have been the highlight of many a colonial day. And there you have it, a glimpse into the mundane world of colonial household chores. From the pulse-bounding excitement of candle making to the edge-of-your-seat thrill of floor scrubbing, these tasks filled the days of our ancestors with endless monotony. As you drift off to sleep, ponder the simple joys of modern conveniences and be grateful that your biggest household chore might just be remembering to start the dishwasher. As we journey back in time to colonial America, let's explore the arduous world of agricultural labor that shaped the early days of our nation. Imagine yourself transported to the 17th or 18th century, where the rhythm of life was dictated by the seasons and the demands of the land. In those times, farming wasn't just a job, it was a way of life that consumed nearly every waking moment. From sunup to sundown, colonists toiled in the fields, their lives inextricably linked to the soil beneath their feet. The work was backbreaking, relentless, and often thankless. Let's start with the most fundamental aspect of colonial farming, land clearing. Before a single seed could be planted, settlers had to transform dense forests into arable land. This process was grueling and dangerous. Armed with nothing more than axes, saws, and their own determination, colonists would spend weeks, if not months, felling trees and removing stumps. Imagine the constant swing of the axe, the ache in your arms, the blisters on your hands. The felled trees weren't wasted, though. They were used to build homes, fences, and tools, but the work didn't end there. Roots had to be dug out, rocks removed, and the soil turned over by hand or with the help of rudimentary plows pulled by oxen or horses. Once the land was cleared, planting began, but this wasn't the mechanized planting we know today. Seeds were sown by hand, a process that required careful attention and a great deal of physical labor. Colonists would walk the length of their fields, scattering seeds from bags tied around their waists. They had to ensure even distribution and proper depth, all while battling the elements and racing against time to plant before the growing season advanced too far. After planting came the endless task of tending to the crops. Weeds were a constant enemy, and without modern herbicides, they had to be removed by hand. Picture yourself bent over in the hot sun, pulling weed after weed, your back aching, your hands dirty and calloused. This wasn't a one-time job, it was a continuous battle throughout the growing season. Watering crops was another challenge. In times of drought, colonists had to manually carry water from nearby streams or wells to their fields. Imagine the weight of those buckets, the strain on your arms and shoulders as you made trip after trip, knowing that without this water, your entire crop and your family's sustenance could be lost. Pests and diseases were constant threats. Without modern pesticides or scientific understanding of plant diseases, colonists often watched helplessly as their crops were decimated. They developed folk remedies and tried various natural deterrents, but often a large portion of the harvest was lost to these invisible enemies. When harvest time finally arrived, it was a period of intense activity. Every able-bodied person in the community would be called upon to help. Grain crops like wheat and barley were cut by hand using scythes, long, curved blades that required skill and strength to wield effectively. Hour after hour, day after day, colonists would swing these scythes, gathering the precious grain that would sustain them through the winter. After cutting, the grain had to be bundled and shocked, tied into bundles and stacked to dry in the field. This was followed by thrashing, where the grain was separated from the straw. Picture yourself wielding a flail, a wooden staff attached to a shorter, free-swinging stick, repeatedly beating the grain to knock the kernels loose. The monotony and physical strain of this task were immense. Once threshed, the grain had to be winnowed to separate the chaff from the kernels. This was often done by tossing the grain into the air on a windy day, letting the breeze blow away the lighter chaff while the heavier kernels fell back into the basket. It was a dusty, time-consuming process that required patience and precision. Other crops had their own unique harvesting challenges. Corn, a staple in many colonial diets, had to be picked by hand, the ears twisted off the stalks one by one. Then came the task of husking and shelling, often done in communal husking bees, where neighbors would gather to share the work and socialize. Root crops like potatoes and turnips had to be dug from the ground, a back-breaking task that left hands raw and muscles aching. Fruit orchards required careful tending throughout the year, with pruning, pest control, and finally the delicate work of harvesting without damaging the precious fruit. But the work didn't end with the harvest. Colonists then had to preserve their hard-earned bounty to last through the long winter months. Vegetables were pickled or dried, fruits were made into preserves, and meats were salted or smoked. Every scrap of food was valuable, and waste was not an option. Animal husbandry was another crucial aspect of colonial agriculture. Livestock provided not only food, but also labor and materials like wool and leather. Caring for animals was a daily task that knew no holidays or days off. Cows needed to be milked twice a day, every day. Sheep needed shearing, pigs needed feeding, and all animals required protection from predators and diseases. The tools used in colonial farming were simple and required constant maintenance. Plows, hoes, and scythes needed to be sharpened regularly. Wooden handles wore out and had to be replaced. The colonists were not just farmers, but also blacksmiths, carpenters, and tool makers by necessity. Weather was a constant concern. A late frost could kill tender seedlings, a drought could wither crops in the field, and an early winter could cut the growing season short. Colonists lived in a constant state of anxiety about the weather, their livelihoods hanging in the balance with each shift in the wind. Despite all this backbreaking labor, colonial farms were far less productive than modern ones. A good harvest might yield only 10 bushels of wheat per acre, compared to the 60 or more bushels common today. This meant that most of what was grown was consumed by the farmer's family, with little left over for sale or trade. The agricultural labor of colonial America was not just physically demanding, it was all-encompassing. It shaped the rhythms of life, the structure of communities, and the very character of the people. The resilience, resourcefulness, and work ethic forged in those fields would go on to define the American spirit for generations to come. As we reflect on this era, we can appreciate the comforts and efficiencies of our modern world. Yet there's also something to be said for the connection to the land, the satisfaction of direct labor, and the sense of community that characterized colonial agriculture. It was a simpler time, but by no means an easier one. As we journey back to colonial America, let's explore the intricacies of community life during this formative period. The social fabric of early American settlements was woven with threads of cooperation, religious devotion, and strict social hierarchies. In the small towns and villages that dotted the colonial landscape, daily life revolved around a central meeting place, often a town square or a communal green. This area served as the heart of the community, where important announcements were made, markets were held, and public gatherings took place. The concept of community in colonial America was deeply rooted in shared responsibilities and mutual support. Neighbors relied on each other for survival, especially in the face of harsh winters, crop failures, and external threats. This interdependence fostered a strong sense of unity among colonists despite the challenges they faced. Religion played a pivotal role in shaping community life. In many colonies, particularly in New England, the church was not just a place of worship, but also the center of social and political activity. Sunday services were mandatory, and attendance was closely monitored. These gatherings served as opportunities for socializing, sharing news, and reinforcing moral values. The Puritan influence in New England colonies led to the establishment of strict moral codes and social norms. Communities were governed by the belief that hard work, piety, and adherence to religious principles were essential for both individual and collective prosperity. This mindset significantly influenced the development of early American culture and values. Education was highly valued in colonial communities, especially in New England. The first public school in America, the Boston Latin School, was founded in 1635. Many towns established their own schools, and literacy rates in the colonies were surprisingly high for the time. However, education was primarily focused on religious instruction and basic reading and writing skills. The social structure in colonial communities was hierarchical and often based on wealth, occupation, and family lineage. At the top of the social ladder were wealthy landowners, merchants, and government officials. Below them were skilled craftsmen, farmers, and laborers. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were indentured servants and enslaved individuals. Despite this rigid social structure, there was more opportunity for social mobility in the colonies than in Europe. The abundance of land and resources in America allowed some industrious individuals to improve their social and economic status through hard work and entrepreneurship. Community governance in colonial America often took the form of town meetings, particularly in New England. These democratic gatherings allowed male property owners to participate in local decision-making processes. Issues such as land distribution, road maintenance, and local laws were discussed and voted upon in these meetings. The role of women in colonial communities was primarily centered around the household. Women were responsible for managing the home, raising children, and contributing to the family's economic well-being through activities such as spinning, weaving, and food preservation. Although their public roles were limited, women played crucial roles in maintaining the social fabric of their communities. Colonial America saw the emergence of distinctive regional cultures. In New England, life was characterized by close-knit, religiously oriented communities. The middle colonies, with their diverse populations, developed more pluralistic societies. The southern colonies, with their plantation economy, developed a more stratified social structure, heavily influenced by the institution of slavery. Community celebrations and festivals were important aspects of colonial life. Harvest festivals, such as the now famous Thanksgiving, brought people together to celebrate successful crops and express gratitude. Other events like militia musters, barn raisings, and quilting bees combined work with social interaction, strengthening community bonds. The tavern or public house played a significant role in colonial community life. These establishments served as meeting places, centers for news and gossip, and venues for political discussions. They also provided lodging for travelers and served as informal courtrooms for local disputes. Healthcare in colonial communities was often a communal affair. While some larger towns had trained physicians, most medical care was provided by local healers, midwives, and community members with knowledge of herbal remedies. In times of illness or injury, neighbors would often come together to support affected families. The concept of mutual aid was deeply ingrained in colonial community life. When disasters struck, such as fires or crop failures, communities rallied together to support those in need. This spirit of cooperation was essential for survival in the challenging environment of early America. As colonial communities grew and prospered, they began to develop more sophisticated systems of trade and commerce. Local markets and fairs became important economic and social events where goods were exchanged and community members could interact with traveling merchants and artisans. The postal system, although rudimentary by modern standards, played a crucial role in connecting colonial communities. Post riders would travel between towns, delivering not just letters, but also newspapers and important announcements. The arrival of the post rider was often a significant event in small communities, bringing news from distant places. As we reflect on community life in colonial America, we can see how these early settlements laid the foundation for many aspects of American society that persist to this day. The emphasis on local governance, community involvement, and mutual support continue to shape American communities, even as they have evolved over the centuries. The legacy of colonial community life can be seen in modern town meetings, local volunteer organizations, and the continued importance of religious institutions in many American communities. While much has changed, the core values of cooperation, civic engagement, and neighborly support remain important elements of American social fabric. As we approach the final frontier of our historical journey, let's venture into the perilous world of colonial America. The untamed wilderness of the New World presented a myriad of dangers to the early settlers, testing their resilience and will to survive. Let's explore some of the most significant threats that colonists faced on the American frontier. First, we must consider the harsh and unforgiving climate. The early colonists were ill-prepared for the extreme weather conditions they encountered. Winters were particularly brutal, with temperatures plummeting far below what most Europeans were accustomed to. The infamous winter of 1609-1610 in Jamestown, Virginia, known as the Starving Time, saw temperatures drop so low that the James River froze over. Many colonists perished from exposure, frostbite, and hypothermia. Summer brought its own set of challenges. The sweltering heat and humidity in regions like the Chesapeake Bay area bred mosquitoes in vast numbers. These insects were not just a nuisance, they were carriers of deadly diseases. Malaria, yellow fever, and other mosquito-borne illnesses ravaged colonial populations, particularly in the southern colonies. The colonists, lacking understanding of how these diseases spread, were often helpless against these invisible enemies. Another significant threat came from the unfamiliar flora and fauna of the New World. Many plants that the colonists encountered were poisonous or inedible, leading to numerous cases of accidental poisoning. The forests were home to predators like bears, wolves, and mountain lions, which posed a constant danger to settlers venturing into the wilderness. Snakes, particularly rattlesnakes, were a common hazard, their venomous bites often proving fatal in an era before effective antivenoms. The colonists also faced the challenge of establishing agriculture in an unfamiliar environment. Many of the crops they were accustomed to growing in Europe failed to thrive in the different soil and climate conditions of North America. This led to frequent food shortages and periods of near starvation, especially in the early years of settlement. The colonists had to learn new agricultural techniques and adopt native crops like corn, squash, and beans to survive. Perhaps one of the most significant dangers came from conflicts with Native American tribes. While some interactions were peaceful and even beneficial, many encounters resulted in violence. The cultural misunderstandings, competition for resources, and territorial disputes often led to bloody conflicts. Raids on settlements were a constant fear for frontier colonists who lived in isolated areas with little protection. One particularly devastating conflict was King Philip's War, which raged from 1675 to 1678. This war, fought between English colonists and several Native American tribes in New England, was one of the deadliest conflicts in American history relative to the population. Entire settlements were destroyed, and a significant portion of the colonial population was killed or captured. The lack of established medical knowledge and facilities also posed a significant threat to colonial life. Simple infections or injuries that we consider minor today could often prove fatal. Childbirth was particularly dangerous, with high mortality rates for both mothers and infants. The scarcity of trained physicians and the prevalence of questionable medical practices, such as bloodletting, often did more harm than good. Sanitation was another major issue in colonial settlements. The lack of proper waste disposal systems and clean water sources led to the spread of waterborne diseases like dysentery and typhoid fever. These diseases could sweep through entire communities, decimating populations and further straining the limited medical resources available. The constant threat of fire was yet another danger that colonial Americans faced. With most structures built primarily of wood and lit by open flames, fires could spread rapidly through settlements. In 1676, Jamestown was almost entirely destroyed by a fire set during Bacon's Rebellion. Similarly, a great fire in Boston in 1676 consumed over 70 homes and businesses. Natural disasters also posed significant threats. Hurricanes along the Atlantic coast could devastate coastal settlements, while inland areas faced the dangers of floods and tornadoes. The colonists, unfamiliar with the weather patterns of the New World, were often caught unprepared by these events. The isolation of frontier life presented its own set of challenges. Many settlers lived far from established towns, making it difficult to obtain supplies or assistance in times of need. This isolation could take a severe toll on mental health, leading to depression and other psychological issues that were poorly understood at the time. Despite these numerous dangers, the colonists persevered. They adapted to their new environment, learned from their Native American neighbors, and gradually built the foundations of what would become the United States. Their resilience in the face of these challenges is a testament to the human spirit and the drive to create a better life, even in the most difficult circumstances. As we conclude our journey through the perils of colonial America, it's worth reflecting on how these early struggles shaped the character of the nation that would emerge. The hardships faced by these early settlers fostered a spirit of self-reliance, adaptability, and community cooperation that would become hallmarks of the American identity. The dangers of the colonial frontier gradually receded as settlements grew and technology advanced. However, the legacy of this period lives on in the stories, traditions, and values that have been passed down through generations. The colonial experience serves as a reminder of the challenges our ancestors faced and the strength they found to overcome them. And so, as we drift off to sleep, let us appreciate the comforts of our modern world, while remembering the courage and determination of those who came before us, facing the unknown dangers of a new world with resolve and hope for a better future.